Please take your seats. The program is about to begin. Welcome to Politico Playbook, the first 100 days. Please welcome Politico's founder and global editor-in-chief, John Harris.
Good morning. As the voice of God up there said, my name is John Harris. I am one of the founders of this publication, and I'm currently the global editor-in-chief. Want to welcome you all to an event that we're really excited about this morning. We had an election 2.5 months ago, and we've got an inauguration in just a few days from now. It was my observation that this election and this presidency that we're on the brink of maybe inspires strong feelings. Maybe you've all experienced the same. I was up in my hometown this past weekend of Rochester, New York, for a kind of a family reunion. My stepfather is turning 95 years old. He's not quite as old as Jimmy Carter, but he's getting there. And anyway, in my own family, there's some members, and one in particular, very enthusiastic about the results of the election in November, and even a little bit gloating, which I think he's entitled to be, because he said, "I told you so," and he did. It's true. There's some other members of my family I observed not as enthusiastic about the results, but both the people who are happy about what happened in November and are excited about what seems to be about to happen in the first 100 days of a new administration, and those who are less enthusiastic were looking at me with a kind of a look of curiosity, like, "John, why are you in such a good mood?" And I'll tell you why I'm in such a good mood. This profession to which I've devoted my adult life, this publication of which I'm a founder and I'm so proud of, we were born for this moment. What's happening in Washington right now is not just a single transformation, but multiple transformations in our politics that promises to be among the most consequential chapters in the history of Washington that I've ever been in position to cover or in position to lead journalists to cover. It's an exhilarating moment, I think, in this city, and in particular for this profession, and most in particular for this publication. It's a huge challenge, it's a huge responsibility, and it's also going to be terrific fun. So that's why I'm in a good mood, and I think I'm not alone in this. I notice my colleagues also having a spring in their step. I think you'll notice that today as you see some of our very best Politico journalists on the stage leading conversations. It's really a big moment and an exciting moment to cover the city when President Trump has promised and been very specific disruptive change. It's clear that he means it. We have both major parties in moments of searching as they have a new opportunity to define what they stand for and who their next generation leadership is. With just 4 years away, we're going to have new faces leading the city. It's a fantastic story. We're going to cover it with authority, with style, with total fairness. That's our job, and we're really excited to get to work. You're going to see some people who are new to Politico today, and also some people who are very familiar. They've been carrying our flag and driving the agenda in our news pages for a long time, a mix of old and new. I'm very eager for you to see these journalists in action. There's one in particular who I'm about to introduce that I would just want to say a special word about. Those of you who are Playbook readers, which I'm guessing might be close to 100% in this audience, may have seen my note to readers yesterday about Jack Blanchard. Jack is somebody who's been very important in the history of Politico. We hired him in 2017 to establish the Playbook brand in London. It was very interesting because even in the very early days of Politico, when we just launched a Playbook, Jack, not then connected to Politico in any way, was fascinated by this platform, fascinated by its power to connect people, fascinated by its ability to identify and amplify the conversation in the political community. And he said at that time, well, I want to do something like that in London. Well, it only took, I guess, close to 10 years for us to make that happen. But Jack attacked the London story in such a classic Politico way. And what's wonderful about Jack is he really thinks in great detail, very purposefully, about what it is that makes a playbook essential, makes it authoritative, makes it fun to read. We've gone through, at Politico, I think we're now on the brink of our 4th set of authors, and each one has brought, or each team has brought, particular styles and particular priorities to them. You're going to hear from Jack about his vision, his priorities, his hope of serving you. That's the essence of what Jack stands for. The playbook must be really useful to its reader. It must be very forward-looking. It must be authoritative. It must be fun to read. And as I heard Jack talk about what he did in Westminster around London, and by the way, if those of you who travel to the UK know, everybody reads it over there. They hang on London Playbook. As I heard him talk about those things, I thought it would be great fun for somebody who's like essentially one of us. He's and one of you. He's a political junkie. He lives for this stuff. He's both a native in one sense, and of course he's an outsider as a Brit. I thought it would be great fun to bring that composite of characteristics here to Washington at this historic moment, and we've pulled it off, and we're going to make it happen. Some of you, you're very familiar with our current team of Playbook authors, which has done fantastic work. Rachel Bade is taking on a new column. You've already seen it. It's setting the agenda up on Capitol Hill and around Washington. Ryan Lizza, who's one of his generation's best writers and one of the great magazine stylists, is going to be continuing to do that work in Politico's pages. And of course, Eugene Daniels is going to be staying with Playbook in this new position of Chief Playbook Correspondent. So Eugene and Jack are going to be carrying this franchise but they're going to be doing it for the whole publication. We really see Playbook as convening a conversation, and my vision is that everything that's in the heads and the notebooks of now 600 journalists really across 9 time zones, we should have access to all of that intelligence, not every day, but this should be the most authoritative picture of what's happening in Washington on any given day. And it's not just a 1 or 2 man exercise. It represents the best of the entire newsroom. That's our vision. That's what we want to do for you, our audience. We're so appreciative of the loyalty that Playbook readers have. We're eager to show off the next generation of what we're doing with this wonderful franchise. And as I say, we're eager to get to work on a moment that we regard as history in the making. Big story, big responsibilities. We intend to meet them. So with that introduction, let me just say hello to Jack Blanchard, who's taking the helm along with Eugene Daniels on this next generation of Playbook. Jack. Welcome, friend.
Thank you. And hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for coming. Yeah, my name's Jack Blanchard. I'm the new managing editor and author of Politico Playbook. I got into town on Saturday night. I met my new team yesterday, and they put me on stage today. Why not? Just get on with it, right? It's the Politico way. I spoke to one of my colleagues when I arrived and asked them if they had any advice for a Brit from rainy London arriving in Washington for the first time. They said, sure, stay out of the snow in the winter, stay out of the heat in the summer, and try to be less annoying than Piers Morgan. And I was like, okay, I think I can do those 3 things. So that's my first brief here. It is, in all seriousness, a real honor and a privilege to be offered the chance to take over this famous newsletter. Is what obviously a very serious, very important, potentially pivotal moment for this country. And so to be welcomed here in this way, into your town, into Politico here in DC, is a great honor for me. And I do think at this moment that a fresh perspective, an outsider's view, can be a valuable thing given the change that's coming here and given what's about to happen in Washington. A fresh set of eyes on it, I think I can bring something different to the table. Playbook for me it's a passion. As John said, I set up the London version back in 2017. I've been a journalist in the UK for 20 years, but I've devoted a large part of my recent life to Playbook in London. And from a standing start there, Politico was not a big name in London back in 2017. We really made it the market leader. The only thing that people read in the morning back in the UK for the past 6 or 7 years has been Politico Playbook, whether you're the Prime Minister, whether you're the lowliest clerk in Westminster, everybody reads it. And the reason for that is because what I've always tried to do with Playbook is to make it useful and essential for people like yourselves who work in politics, who care deeply about politics. The idea is that it will be something that tees you up for the day ahead. You wake up, you need it to guide you through the day. That is what Playbook is going to be when I take over it next weekend. The first edition will be Monday morning. I believe there's stuff happening on Monday here next week, so it should be a fun time to take over it. I'm very conscious that I'm standing on the shoulders of giants here, that some of the greatest journalists this town's ever seen have authored Playbook in the past. We're going to see a couple of them on stage today. The great Rachel Bade, now our Capitol Bureau Chief, senior Washington columnist. She'll be interviewing Speaker Mike Johnson later this morning. And of course, my new partner in crime, my new best pal, a guy you know very well, Eugene Daniels, is going to be co-hosting this event with me today. And he's going to be working closely with me on the next iteration of Playbook. Now, I think we should probably move on to our first guest of the day. Someone who knows, I think, more about the inner workings of a Trump White House than just about anybody else, and someone who remains and will always be a very, very important voice in Trump world. Joining us virtually is former White House strategist Steve Bannon for a conversation with our new White House Bureau Chief, Dasha on what he foresees in this next second chapter of a Trump White House. So let's welcome Dasha onto the stage, if she's lurking in the background there somewhere. Ladies and gentlemen, Dasha Burns.
Hello, Politico fam, friends. As a newbie to this amazing organization, I'm learning every day all the incredible things that the people Politico can do, including creating this Steve Bannon avatar here today, beaming in straight from the war room. Very futuristic here. Steve was going to join us in person, but had some airplane issues. Maybe some things, Steve, you want to take up with the outgoing transportation secretary? Thank you, Steve, for being here. We appreciate it.
Dasha, thanks, and thanks for Politico for having me.
Let's start with some of the headlines that you've been making recently. There's a new voice in President Trump's ear, Elon Musk. You're not happy about it. Is President Trump too close to Musk?
I did, just to be, it's not that I'm not happy about it. I mean, Elon Musk, and I think I'm the first one that really built the narrative. He came in basically in the spring and early summer, and most importantly, he backed our play, which was this was going to be a MAGA plus election, a base plus these dissident moms at the school boards. And people have been trying to moderate President Trump even on the campaign trail. So number one, Elon Musk came in and totally backed kind of the populist, MAGA play. He then wrote $250 million worth of checks to back that play, not to put in TV advertising, which is extraordinary. That's not over a whole cycle, that's in 5 months. And I've said from the beginning, both in the United States, he deserves a place at the table. And in Europe, I've said, and I think Politico has covered it pretty well, is that he holds the two tactical nuclear weapons of modern politics, which is unlimited cash and a social media platform that's not just ubiquitous, but also he can deem who's heard and who's not heard. And there's not many governments in Europe that are going to withstand that. That being said, in Politico today, the piece by Messerly and Rein, I think lay it out the best. This is a new coalition, much broader than 16. This is the beginning, I think, of a 1932 FDR-type realignment in American politics. And clearly, you're going to have members of that coalition that don't agree on everything. I do fundamentally disagree with some of the basics of the Mark Andreessen, Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, Peter Thiel outlook, philosophy of life and philosophy of politics. And there's going to be clashes. But I think the Politico article today is the best at summing it up. President Trump is good, particularly about people arguing, ideas, and the best idea and the best policy wins. So going forward, it's going to be quite intense. I actually think that we're winning this round, and we're winning this round pretty big. He's already backed off the H-1B visas. He's already said they got to be reformed. We say they have to be done away with. I think we'll get Elon there. And as soon as I can turn Elon Musk from a techno-feudalist to a populist nationalist, we'll start making real progress.
If you can't turn him, do you want him out?
You can't turn, look, the bottom line, he's not going to be totally out. I mean, there's reporting today that he is going to have some access, I think, to the EOB, maybe an office over there, particularly with Doge. So he's not going to be out. Look, when you write $250 million worth of checks, when you've got, when you're that involved, when you have actually backed a ground game, you're going to have a seat at the table. I've always argued it can't be at the head of the table, and that table shouldn't be the cabinet room in the West Wing. So I'm a realist, and I've had this fight before. People, I think some folks remember back in 17, Elon and I went back and forth virtually every day about the EV tax credits, which I told him at the time. I said, people making $32,000 a year are not going to underwrite you and these venture capitalists on a company that could be worth billions and billions of dollars, maybe hundreds of billions of dollars. That was Tesla, and I won that round. So I've gone with Elon before. We're going to go at it again. Elon's not going to go away because he's got, like I say, he's got the two tactical nuclear weapons.
But do you think he has too much
modern politics, and he will use those tactical nuclear weapons.
Do you think he has too much influence right now? I mean, he's been posted up at Mar-a-Lago. He's been in Trump's ear nonstop since the election.
as they teach you in Harvard Business School, kind of in the first year, there's power and there's influence. What's shocking to me is he doesn't have much power.
Why do you say that?
If you gave it, well, because he doesn't have the ability to actually make decisions and inform those decisions and drive those decisions. If you look at even the time at Mar-a-Lago, he's come in, definitely had some influence, and he's had some influence on picks, but let's go back over that. He was adamant about Howard Lutnick being Secretary of the Treasury, actually trashed Scott Bessent. Last time I looked, Scott Bessent's hearing, I think, is on Thursday or Friday for Secretary of the Treasury. You know, many of the picks that he wanted didn't come to pass. Some of the picks did, right? So he's had some influence. He's had some influence over policy. None of that's really stuck yet as hard policy. Like, for instance, the HB1 visas, the whole issue of you know, the business community, particularly the tech community, essentially importing indentured servants to take jobs of American citizens. He's had some influence so far, but he hasn't. Those policies haven't stuck. It's going to be a constant. It's going to be a constant fight and a constant clash of ideas. And if I would go long the populist nationalist positions on these. You know, the hardcore American citizens come first, America comes first. So Elon's not going to go away. And quite frankly, he shouldn't go away. I mean, you know, I've been quite intense, and part of that is to try to shift the Overton window on this debate. But Elon's not going to go away and anytime soon. And there's going to be a continual clash and a continual fight over ideas.
How do you have that fight and how do you have that clash? For those of us that don't know the inner workings behind the scenes, does that play out in public with you, sort of trashing him in interviews or criticizing him on your podcast? Or are there conversations behind the scenes that are happening that we don't know about?
You know, it still kind of shocks me that the political press, it hasn't really spent the time both on populist policies and or even President Trump. President Trump, to me, is a McLuhan-esque figure. And what I mean by that, he deeply believes at a very deep level Marshall McLuhan's ideas and concepts about mass communications. President Trump is about how do you connect with a mass audience and how do you connect your ideas with a mass audience and also how you read the room from a mass audience. That to me explains his popularity, that he's kind of hardwired in to the zeitgeist of working and middle-class people in this country and where they are. And I think a lot of that is coming from his Queens background, not his Manhattan background. So the best way I have found to ever fight for ideas is to do it very publicly and to do it using media. And I think this is the reason that War Room has been such a powerful platform.
You were one of the architects in the first administration of the shock and awe strategy. Trump's different this time around. You're not in the White House this time around, but is there going to be the same shock and awe vibe, or is it something different altogether?
Dasha, I think it's going to be much more intense. We refer to it right now. We refer to it right now as days of thunder. And I think the days of thunder, I think these days of thunder starting next week are just going to be incredibly, incredibly intense. I think you're going to see 50 executive orders. You're going to see a lot of legislation put forward. You're going to see the beginning of it today with Pete Hegseth. So this is going to be quite intense. It's going to be 10 to the 10th power more intense, I believe, than the shock and awe we did in 16 and 17. Because remember, there's been 4 years of preparation here. You know, say what you will about Project 2025 and other projects like that at these other think tanks and other groups, but we spent years, people developing the policies, developing the executive orders, seeing the direction of where we want to take this movement, and also developing personnel. You're going to see many more people hit the beach, many more cabinet people get confirmed much quicker. You're going to have much more thought-through ideas. There are going to be many more executive orders. And most of these, I think at the beginning, or all of them at the beginning, the 50 that I think hit right away, will have Office of Legal Counsel opinions on them. So I tell people, shock and awe was a 17 concept. Days of thunder, I think, are going to be the concept starting next Monday. Because I believe President Trump is going to hit it, and hit it hard with what I call, or Bartley at Wall Street Journal called muzzle velocity. Those types of driving force of policies and personnel to get things done and get them done quickly.
So Heritage Foundation, AFPI, these groups that have been building playbooks like Project 2025, you think that will infiltrate and have an impact on some of the policies of the administration? Steve, did we lose you? Uh-oh, this is the futuristic excitement that I was talking about. Can you hear me, Steve?
Dasha, I'm afraid I didn't hear you. Can you repeat that?
Yeah, can you hear me now? Testing,
Yeah,
one,
I
two.
you
got
can
me.
hear you now.
All
Yeah,
right.
thank you.
Excellent. Thanks for bearing with us, guys. I was saying, you mentioned Project 2025. I mean, Heritage Foundation, AFPI, these groups that have been putting together some playbooks. Do you think that will have an impact and sort of infiltrate some of the policies coming from the administration?
All those. It's not 2025 has become a buzzword, but it's all these different groups over 4 years, particularly people that believe strongly that the 2020 election was stolen and that President Trump was the rightful president and would come back and win the primary and take the White House again. People dug down and started working these policies. What did we not get accomplished the first time? What do we want to get accomplished now? And people went to work over a 4-year period and built the networks, kind of the subject matter experts in the networks needed to actually have the 3,000 people hit the beach right away that don't have to be Senate confirmed, but also the other 1,000 that have to be Senate confirmed. President Trump's administration this time is 10 times more prepared than when we came in the first, because we were kind of a come from behind victory. As you remember, we didn't have a lot of time to think through transition. There wasn't that deep bench of players that believed in President Trump's philosophy. So not only is President Trump the most powerful individual politically in Washington, he also now has a true army in back of him of people that have spent years thinking through policies, of people that have worked together for years and are prepared now next Monday to hit the beach. And I think you see it right now, what I call the flood the zone concept in the confirmations this week. You're going to see people that are coming together that have great backup, have thought through policy, are prepared to hit a relatively hostile confirmation process, both from a little bit from establishment Republicans, but particularly the Democrats. And I just think, I call it days of thunder. I think people are not prepared right now, particularly the political press, of how intense this is going to be, but this is years in the making.
You talk about the army that's behind him now. The coalition is quite broad. It's so different. I mean, just looking at the events in this coming inaugural weekend, right? You've got the crypto ball, you've got young influencers, you have the Black Conservative Federation, Hispanic ball, all of these folks that weren't engaged last time around. But that makes it a little bit more complicated, right? There are a lot of different interests. I want to talk about some of that, particularly when it comes to Congress. You have Speaker Mike Johnson, who will actually be on this stage later today. Johnson didn't have full Republican support to be Speaker. You have Senate Leader John Thune, who's a Mitch McConnell guy. Are these the right leaders to enact President Trump's agenda?
Let me just talk about your first part of that, about this broad coalition. Think about it for a second. The Democrats, or the established order in Washington, had every source of institutional power. They had the media, they had Wall Street, they had the technology in Silicon Valley, they had the corporatists, they had every lobbyist. This kind of populist nationalist movement, and to show the power. Our new coalition partners are not maybe with us 100% ideologically, but they understand the power of this going forward, that the Democrats basically, because I come from a Democrat family, basically abandoned working class people in the middle class in populism. And they see the power of populism. But clearly, it's a complicated coalition. We have the broligarchs, right? And you have hardcore, populist nationalists. And so that coalition going forward, and you see the collapse kind of the Democratic Party that lost some of the central parts of their thing, particularly Silicon Valley and a little bit of Wall Street. This is now coming together. It's going to be very complicated. You're going to see it play out in the halls of Congress, I believe, because no one really paid attention to this radical idea called modern monetary theory, that right now in Washington, D.C., everything we do, whether it's the war in Ukraine, whether it's deportations, whether it's immigration, even deconstruction of the administrative state, everything is going to be within the framework that a lot of the easy alternatives of how to pay for things and the sustainability, not of the planet, but the sustainability of the economic and financial model of our country and our government is going to be the #1 criteria. It's going to be the prism everything is looked through. And these are going to be intense battles. You can see it already, this battle on Capitol Hill between the 1 and 2 reconciliations. This is not simply a process story. This cuts to the heart of how one is going to govern in the future. And President Trump has this tension of at the same time has a coalition that really could end up being 2/3 of the American people if handled correctly. He has to balance that within this framework of this massive debt and the refinancing of this debt and the paying for the refinancing of this debt. So no, I think right now on Capitol Hill it's going to be very intense. Speaker Johnson, and he knows I've never really been a fan. He's got a horrible job. It's a tough job. He's going to have to put together, coalitions, particularly of people that want to have significant reductions in deficits. And I just think even the last couple of days, the mindset in Washington is still wrong. People come up and say, oh, we have a $5 trillion cut, but it's over a 10-year period. We have to get out of that mindset. It is what is the first 2 years. I put my investment banker hat on. This is like a restructuring. Forget 10. I'm not interested in 10 years. I'm not interested in the out years. I'm not interested in years 5, 6, and 7. I'm interested in this appropriations process. I'm interested in this deficit. I'm in this year and next year. What's the size of it, how it's going to be financed, and how you have dramatic moves on how to close it. This is one of the reasons I think what Elon's doing at Doge is so absolutely central, not just to deconstruction of administrative state, but to actually work with Russ Vought and Scott Bessent and come up with a model that Speaker Johnson and Thune could shepherd through the House and the Senate to actually put something on the president's desk that reinforces how do we get back to a sustainable financial and economic model in this country.
But to that point, I mean, there are ideological differences here. So are Johnson and Thune the right leaders in this moment?
I think, look, they were picked by their House members. They were picked by the Senate. President Trump's very comfortable with both people, and I think that's very important because this is going to be like going into combat, right? This is going to be so, in the moment, it's going to be so intense, and decisions are going to have to be made. You have to trust the judgment of those people. President Trump trusts the judgment of Speaker Johnson. He trusts the judgment of John Thune. I always have different opinions, but I'm just one schmendrick in the crowd, and we're going to fight very intensely for these things. President Trump makes the ultimate decisions, and that's why I think the first most important fight right now is it's not just a process fight. It's a fight about how we go forward. That's why I think that the 1 versus 2 reconciliations is probably the most important fight that we're going through right now, and it will set the tone for not just the first year of President Trump's second term, but I think will set the tone for actually how we finance this country and this government going forward.
I mean, on tax policy, for example, there's a lot of talk about lowering the corporate tax rate. Again, these ideological differences. Do you think that kind of focus on corporate tax rate risks alienating the working class that you talk about?
Well, this is why, I'm one voice among many, right? Like I said, I'm just another schmendrick. However, this is quite critical. This is why we're fighting for 2 bills. We want to take care of immigration, deportations, energy, and maybe some defense in the first bill that's not revenue generating, and so it could start in the Senate. We agree with Senator Thune and the 53 senators who appear to agree with us to do that. In the tax bill, look, one thing that's disturbed me coming out already. We want the populist wing, right, are going to fight for not just no taxes on tips, but I noticed in Jason Smith's when I missed the part where it said no tax on Social Security, no tax on overtime, no tax on bonuses.
Those were critical campaign promises.
Our wing of the party, our wing of President Trump's movement that's totally supportive of President Trump want to go and have much more tax cuts for working class people and for the middle class. And if the wealthy and the donors won't get their lobbyists to support lower federal spending, which they're not, they've really been the class that's driven this modern monetary theory that's got us in this jam, that deficits don't matter. Well, now we know deficits do matter because it's the financing and refinancing of those deficits that are killing us. So in that regard, to me, corporate tax rates have to come up. And the wealthy have to be taxed more simply for the fact that we have to close this gap on the deficits on an ongoing basis. Now, if they can turn their lobbyists and support Elon Musk and support particularly Russ Vought on having dramatic cuts in federal spending, and I mean in years, I mean in this year and next year. Don't give me 10 years. I'm not interested. When people tell you, oh, it's $6 trillion of cuts over a 10-year period, they are lying to you. This is how we got into this situation. When McCarthy said, oh, they have all these Republican wins. These are not wins. This is another way to kick the can down the road. This has to be addressed now. We're adamant in on the show and talking to people and presenting to President Trump that you have to have many more taxes, particularly the tax cut on Social Security. That is a priority. Any tax cut, particularly even reinstalling the tax cuts of 2017 for the wealthy. As you know, Dasha, I had this huge fight with Gary Cohn and Jared Kushner and Steve Mnuchin in the Oval Office with President Trump. And hey, I lost. I lost, and the Wall Street Journal came out, Bannon's got to go. I lost. I lost that round, but I think we're going to win this round. And this is absolutely, I think, central to the vibrancy of the economy and really to the American people.
So you talk about cutting at the federal level. What's the first agency that you would scrap or gut?
Okay, first off, I spent 8 years as a naval officer. I spent almost 4 years at sea on a destroyer. My daughter's a West Point graduate, 101st Airborne, served in Iraq. So Bannons have a history of doing the 5 years as citizens, good citizens, and then going to civilian life. She's actually she's been at the support of Pete Hegseth today. She'll be in the audience as a former junior officer to support, female officer to support Pete. Now, that being said, when I see an NDAA of $900 billion, and I don't really see us in a real confrontation with the Chinese Communist Party, either in capital markets or technology, the defense budget's too big. I'm pretty adamant the defense budget's got to be cut. I think you start, okay, first off.
Would Hegseth do that, Steve? Would Hegseth do that?
When people tell you that the problem here is entitlements, they're missing the point. We're not going to get to entitlements. Entitlements right now is a contract with the little guy. They're not going to give up their Social Security. They're not going to give up their Medicare until they see the political class and the donor class actually get their arms around discretionary spending. And to get your arms around this discretionary spending, you have to start with the defense budget. We have to rethink. We have to have a revolution in military affairs, and this is why I think Pete's so important. A revolution in military affairs that then flows through how we actually pay for this. At $900 billion, and this is why I'm so adamant about NATO's got to pay more, the Gulf Emirates and the situation we have in the Middle East have to pay more. We can't have two carrier battle groups in the Red Sea, keeping the Suez Canal open for the Europeans. In East Asia, Japan's got to step up to the plate. Our allies have to step up to the plate. The defense budget is too big. And I realize people say, well, we for years haven't done things. Well, listen, we got to rethink this. If you're going to cut discretionary spending, it has to start with a good faith effort to rethink the defense budget. And to have an NDAA that was $900 billion, given the financial situation we have and given the reality of what we face now, to me is grossly irresponsible. Grossly irresponsible. And that has to be addressed head on. And that's why I think the Pete Hegseths of the world and the young warrior caste that fought these horrible wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and understand what's happening in Ukraine and the Middle East are the perfect leaders today to really get in back of significant changes in our defense policy to keep us strong, to make sure that we're the main thing, which is the confrontation with the Chinese Communist Party, but are able to think through defense so that we can reorder defense and to get to then the social programs that you're going to have to talk about, and they're going to have to be some reorienting and some cuts in that to then eventually have a conversation with the American people of entitlements. There's not going to be a conversation. There's not going to be a conversation where they're willing to accept from the political class in Washington anything where they think the political class is a bunch of con men that are bought and paid for by the corporatists, Wall Street, and the donor class, which is exactly the situation we have today.
So I think we've gotten a couple new hashtags from you today. We've got Broligarchs and we've got Days of Thunder. And those Days of Thunder, I assume, are in part going to come from those executive orders, right? So what is the executive order that you are fighting hardest for?
I mean, all the ones Stephen Miller and Homan have got, I think, a great grasp on both the deportations, the wall security. So that I think is covered by very smart guys who know this. The one I want that's not going to be the first day, but eventually get there, I want a complete 100% moratorium on all immigration until
legal,
we get our arms.
Including legal?
I say legal immigration in quotes. There is no legal immigration in this country. It's all a con. It's all a con against American workers. Every part of it. These programs have been so abused and so gamed. I believe we need a 100% moratorium for a while to get this sorted.
So, Steve,
and really
in a country made up of immigrants, you want a 100% moratorium on all immigration?
Just for a while. A moratorium until we get our arms around, so then we can have a factual conversation. What we need is to go and show the facts about what these visa programs have done, the people that can invest money here and get visas, all of it. The programs are so obscure, have been done behind closed doors, are so complicated. We need a discussion on that. And the American people are thirsting for a discussion on that.
Have you talked to President Trump about this?
I have not talked to President Trump about this, but I do talk every day on the show about this, so I know that the base of our movement and the base of our party support a moratorium. And I didn't say it's forever, but a moratorium until we get our arms around. So that's
Have you talked to Stephen Miller about it?
I've had discussions with a lot of people about this, but I've not talked to the president. The other one is to set up, I think, a refocus, like President Trump is talking about a new Monroe Doctrine from Panama to Greenland, is also to rethink all about taxes. We have an Internal Revenue Service that was set up basically in 1913, right? When we, after the panic of 1906, 1907, one of the drivers I would love to see in executive orders is set up an external revenue service, that we wouldn't just look at tariffs, but because tariffs paid for everything up until the early 20th century. But you wouldn't just look at tariffs, you look at everything about how you can charge fees, essentially, whether that's on investment, whether that's on other things of access to this country. This is America's behind the golden door. Okay, and this market's the most robust, lucrative market in the world, and we shouldn't just let people have access. We shouldn't let foreigners have access to this market and to the American people and American citizens for free. So I think I would love to see something that set up an external revenue service in Treasury that eventually took the burden off people on internal revenue services. There's no reason the American people, American corporations, even the donor class has to pay for everything, and I think we have to rethink that. So things on revenue, other things on economics, on immigration, I think are important, and not just illegal. We've been focused so much on illegal immigration, we tend to forget that in the 2016 campaign, and particularly the 2016 primary, one of the biggest things President Trump had going for him was talking about this whole concept of legal immigration, which honestly is so gamed. There is no legal immigration in this country right now.
So you've got your perch here in the war room, but as far as we know, you're not going into the White House this time around. So who is the Steve Bannon in this administration that's going to have Trump's ear?
I think it's a very different structure. I think Susie is a safe pair of hands. Susie Wiles, I hired her actually in the 2016 campaign against the recommendation of President Trump at the time. She was fantastic. We would not have won Florida in 2016 if it had not been for Susie Wiles. We brought her in, I think, in August, right after I got there in September. She's fantastic. She's a safe pair of hands. She's got a way she runs things. I think you see a very different kind of White House staff and White House going forward than kind of the contentious in the open fighting that we had, but they were all for good reasons. There was different policies. I'm not so sure. I think President Trump, when you say Steve Bannon, President Trump's always been his own strategist. President Trump, and particularly if you look at the way he's managed this coalition so far, of how he put it together for this great victory across the board, this sweep of how he's actually managed it in the transition and how he managed it going forward. President Trump's a deal guy, and he understands how to I think, juggle opposing views and, quite frankly, strong personalities. So one thing I will note, that many of the strongest personalities in President Trump's orbit are not going in the White House. Corey Lewandowski, Dave Bossie, Jason Miller, Boris Epstein, Steve Bannon. I see some pattern recognition there, and I think all of those people are going to be very strong voices on the outside in whatever vertical they're in. And so I would look for President Trump to have a lot of support both inside the White House with a much more smoothly running operation, and also outside with allies who now have kind of their, as you call them, perches or their own kind of verticals that can support the president in the policies that he's eventually going to want to drive.
Susie Wiles plans to be sort of a gatekeeper in the White House. Do you believe she can execute that role, and do you think that the right people will be gatekept, so to speak?
This is, Susie, I think, smart enough to know there's one level of gatekeeping and then another. Look, the failures of John Kelly and others, President Trump's President Trump. You know, he's in his 70s now. He's got a House style. And one thing people should know, he's always trying to get input from a wide variety of people. People who the public doesn't even know, just to bounce ideas off him. He's always seeing how it plays in the room. He's very good at judging what people are thinking and where the country's going. This is one of his superpowers. And so and I think Susie's smart enough because you've seen already on the campaign and so far in the transition. She doesn't try to go John Kelly on you. She doesn't try to hermetically seal the president because he can't be hermetically sealed. Particularly now, given that he knows 2020 was stolen, he came back in 2021. In those first couple of dark years when even Rupert Murdoch said we're going to make him a non-person, President Trump has gone up the learning curve of confidence in his own judgment and confidence in policies and also people that will have his back. So there's still going to be total access, I think, at one level to President Trump because this is just the way, this is his House style. I think she is going to have a little more management, so it's maybe not quite so chaotic at the staff level. Although I will say, particularly in that first year, all the benefits of the economy and foreign policy, the peace and prosperity of 19, those seeds were sown with Reince Priebus and the team with all the fighting that went on. They were all sown in 2017. That's why this first 100 next week, the Days of Thunder next week, the first 100 days, the first 6 months, and the first year, to me, are everything in this, because the seeds of peace and prosperity that President Trump is dedicated to bring back, it's all going to be sown there. That will all be where it's either sown or where it's not sown. And so that's where this fight the next year is going to be so intense.
Now, to be clear, I know this has been slipped in a couple of times. There's been no evidence of widespread fraud in 2020, but I don't want to look back. Let's keep looking forward.
Hang on. Ho. Look at Jack Smith's, there's no thing of widespread fraud. Please, hang on, Dasha. I understand you've got a legal thing you have to do. I appreciate that. But why is the J6 committee having people go to the White House and beg for blanket preemptive pardons? Right? Why is Jack Smith and his team quitting early and also talking to people about pardons? This has to be.
Well, they're worried about political persecution in the same way that you have claimed that that's an issue.
Hey, if they just thought it was political persecution, they wouldn't be worried. They're worried. This has to be totally adjudicated. You have to adjudicate 2020. You have to adjudicate J6. You have to adjudicate the vast criminal conspiracy against President Trump. And on this one, we're absolutely adamant. President Trump needs to do this for this country, not for himself. You see last night, the Jack Smith thing's a nothing burger. Total nothing burger.
Well, look, see, President Trump himself has said he wants to look to the future. So let's keep doing that, because otherwise we're going to get off the rails real fast here.
President Trump does want to look to the future. He says his retribution will be peace and prosperity. That doesn't mean that some of his colleagues that understand what they not just tried to do to him, but did to this country has to be adjudicated. And this is going to be a big effort, I think, of people try to get President Trump on board to do that. Like I said, President Trump is not a vindictive person. President Trump is not someone that looks for revenge, but we need to do this for the country, and you should know there are elements of President Trump's coalition that are absolutely adamant that this has to be done. This weaponization has to be taken out root and branch from this government.
So you say he's not a vindictive person, but you do want to see some vindictiveness?
No, not vindictive. This is not, look, I went to a federal prison for 4 months. I'm not vindictive about that at all. That is what it is, but I did it on a reason to not bend the knee to Nancy Pelosi in an illegitimate J6 committee that's now begging the White House for blanket preemptive pardons. Benny Thompson, the chairman's publicly, and again today it's in Punch Bowl, about they've got a scoop about how they're doing it. So listen, this is not about vindication. It's not about revenge. This is about, we can never allow this to happen again. And the only way that's going to happen is you have to put forward to the American people what the actual facts are. What the facts are of 2020, what the facts are of J6, what the facts are of this vast criminal conspiracy that came after President Trump. Hell, he was indicted for, 92 felonies? This kangaroo court in New York has got him for 34 felonies. That all has to be from New York City to Georgia to Washington, D.C. That has to be fully vetted, investigated, and adjudicated. And I've strongly recommended a special prosecutor that doesn't report to the Justice Department. The special prosecutor to me should report right to the White House.
Steve, you mentioned your stint in prison in 2024. You're also facing trial again in February on charges related to alleged money laundering, conspiracy, and a scheme to defraud. That's something that Trump can't pardon you in that case. How is that all going to impact your ability to help President Trump enact his agenda?
It's not going to impact at all. First off, the situation in New York, I'm not worried about whatsoever. We will take care of that and won't impact me. No offense, I come out of prison this time with more power, more impact, more focus than I had going in. So I'm not afraid of prison. I'm not afraid of any charges they put up. I'm not afraid of any kangaroo court. I'm simply not afraid of it. So we'll take care of the situation in New York. Another political persecution, but we'll get through that and won't impact me whatsoever.
And lastly, I know you're close with Don Jr. The Trump family this time around, there's a different dynamic. Jared and Ivanka aren't going to be involved, but what do you think will be the role of the Trump family and folks like Don and Eric?
By the way, I'm working very closely with Jared. I'm working very closely with Jared on prison reform. Jared Kushner and I met a year ago at the Jim Caviezel film at Bedminster and made a pact that we would work together to make sure President Trump was reelected. That was that imperative. And I am a big supporter of all the prison reform in the First Step Act that Jared Kushner, there'll be some announcement, I think, in the future about Jared and I working together on the First Step Act and prison reform. We're big believers in prison reform. I think, obviously, Don Jr., who's a fantastic guy and we're very close with, Don Jr. has taken up more of a lead role, but Eric and Laura did such an amazing job at the RNC, so we're working very well with the family, and particularly I'm working very well with Jared Kushner. And Jared Kushner, I'm telling you, has done something to help this country that's very significant, and that is prison reform, which we need dramatically.
All right, Steve, I know you got a show to record. Thank you so much for beaming in here, and sorry for the technical difficulties, everyone. Steve, thanks so much.
Dasha, thank you, and thank Politico for having me.
We got a quick word from our sponsors, and then my colleague Jonathan Martin will be up on stage here. And enjoy, everyone. Thank you so much.
Well, good morning, everybody. I am Jason Grimay. I'm the CEO of the American Clean Power Association. Politico certainly knows how to warm up a room. So look, with obvious intent, this event marks a recurring inflection point in our democracy. Every 4 years, we have a challenge to metabolize the aggression and the division that is inherent in any election and rise to the challenge of governing a divided country. The American Clean Power Association, the hundreds of companies we represent, are committed to be active participants in this process. And so we're really pleased to have a role in sponsoring and discussions that are happening here today. It is, I think, well known that energy policy is going to be a priority in the Trump administration, and the nation and our industry have a lot at stake. Electricity demand is absolutely soaring. Fortunately, our nation has the diverse natural resources, unparalleled technological capacity, deep capital markets to build with speed and scale. The question that we need to address is, can our government keep up? Can our government maintain a pro-job, pro-growth investment economy? Can our government confront the tangle of bureaucracy that is stymieing commercial enterprise and energy systems across the country? Last year, over 90% of all of the power added to our nation's electric grid was renewable power. Equally important, over 2/3 of all of that power was deployed by companies that also have fossil and nuclear assets. So in the real economy, all of the above energy is actually already underway. It's time that we actually think about moving beyond the partisan caricature that electrons and molecules actually have their own political affiliations and rally together to actually support all forms of American energy. While not approaching the challenge facing Speaker Johnson or others when it comes to challenging governing, I have a little bit of experience in representing a diverse caucus. American Clean Power members span from the nation's largest electric utilities to multinational oil and gas companies, major US manufacturers, and the largest deployers of wind and solar, battery storage and transmission in the country. When we do the hard work of reaching consensus, as we were able to do on permitting and transmission legislation, we can bring a powerful and constructive voice to the democratic process. So at the beginning and the end of the day, all technologies have strengths and limitations. If we combine the best attributes of the diverse array of American resources, from natural gas to nuclear to hydro to wind and solar and geothermal power, we can meet the demand that is growing rapidly and power an economy that is affordable and reliable and clean. And so it is for that reason we are delighted to be with you all today. We're happy to join in supporting and welcoming the success of the 119th Congress and the 47th President of the United States, and look forward to a great conference. Thanks.
Hello, hello. Can you guys hear me? Is my microphone on? There we go. Hello, everyone. Eugene Daniels, Chief, it's brand new, so I'm not used to saying it, Chief Playbook Correspondent. For those that are hanging out in the back, please join us. Come in. Come in here. We have beautiful seats for you that somebody paid a lot of money for to rent, I'm sure. So we love to use them. One more round of applause for Dasha. Her first time out here for us at Politico. If it wasn't clear before today, what we got from that interview with Steve Bannon is that the civil war within the Republican Party, even though they have unified control over DC, is hot and heavy, and it is not going anywhere for a long time. Really quickly, I'd also like to just publicly thank Ryan Lizza and Rachel Bade for riding with me for 4 years on Playbook, 4 long years. They're friends. I learned a ton from them, and I'm also very happy that they, not me, will get to sleep in just a little bit more as we move forward. I'm thrilled to welcome Mr. Jack to the team. He brings this mix of an insatiable curiosity, extreme talent, dynamic personality, and he's very nice, so that's also helpful. It's all required to write Playbook and hard to find sometimes. The problem, we had our first fight, which is that he likes beans on toast in the morning, which is a problem for me, so we're already tussling here. For our next interview, the pressure is on for Republicans as they take the majority across the board. We have hearings for President-elect Trump's nominees already starting, underway right now as we speak. They have a reconciliation bill or two, it's unclear, to get passed and signed in the next 6 months, and a litany of other priorities that they're trying to pass. So here to discuss more about that on the Hill, please welcome Senator Katie Britt and Politico Politics Bureau Chief and Senior Political Columnist, Jonathan Martin.
Well, thanks for that introduction, Eugene, and thank you all for being here. And thanks, Senator Britt, for joining us as we get going here. There's not much in the news. I think it's kind of a slow news week. I thought that I'd start with the election and then work forward, if we could here. Yeah. You, as the audience knows, are the senator from Alabama, but you also worked in politics before this. You worked in the business community in Alabama, and then you worked for a fellow named Richard Shelby, who was here in Washington for a few years, yes. As I recall. So you understand politics, you understand the tides of politics, the ebbs and the flows of politics. And obviously it was a great year for Republicans, but it was a lot like 2004, 20 years ago, where you had sort of demoralized liberals and really energized conservatives in the aftermath. And then 2006, 2008, the pendulum swang back. How do you, today's GOP, avoid that repeat of having this mandate, it seems, and then having it sort of be frittered away the next 2 cycles?
Yeah, so I think one thing that we have to do is obviously stay focused and stay unified. And obviously those 2 things are more challenging than they appear at times. Look, if you kind of rewind back to this summer. So for me, as a member of the Republican conference, this summer when President Trump came to the NRSC and sat down with all of the Republican senators in that room, that was the very first time I'd had an opportunity to truly feel like I was part of a unified party.
Interesting.
We talked through a lot of the different things that we wanted to do when we took the Senate back, when President Trump took back the White House, and we held the House. And what that meant for us. It was everything from how do we rebuild our Navy to how do we secure our border. And so those kinds of conversations and kind of the energy that was felt in that room has truly, for the most part, carried us through to today. As you know, President Trump came and spoke with us last week, talking about what can we do, how do we hit the ground running. So in this, you have an opportunity for the kind of sort of the tug and pull of both everything from the media to the Democratic Party and to people who are in cycle. But I think, remembering what we said to the American people and what they voted for, because there are so many things that we have truly litigated over the last 4 years. And when you look at what was done on November 5th, the American people spoke. And so remembering, what they said, which was we want secure borders, we want safe streets and safe communities. We want opportunity not only for us, but we want to leave opportunity for the next generation, wanting to return to peace through strength, wanting common sense back in the policymaking space. So it will take discipline and renewed focus that we achieve those things that we were asked to do.
Did you use that opportunity with the president-elect last week to say anything to him or to ask him any questions or get any plugs in for Space Force or anything like that?
Yeah. So one of the things that I've done, particularly with Space Command and whatnot, obviously, for those of you who have followed, this has been a fairly contentious issue over the last couple of years. We in Alabama believe that the rightful home to Space Command is at Redstone Arsenal, both for national security and what we're seeing across the country. We believe that we won that fair and square, coming in first and ranking in that space that showed that. Obviously, the Biden administration took a turn and removed that and sent it to Colorado. We work really diligently as a delegation. That's one thing the Alabama delegation does well consistently, is work together in a bicameral, bipartisan way to ensure that that could be revisited.
Is President Trump aware of your feelings on the issue?
Absolutely. And have also taken the time to make sure that the various cabinet appointees that come through, that we talk to him about that as well. So I obviously take my Article 2, Section 2 duties very seriously, and having the opportunity to sit across from these people, J-Mart, you want to hear their vision. You want to hear how they plan to execute President Trump's agenda. And then it gives you an opportunity to talk about these things and say, do you know this? Will you watch this? Will you commit to working with me?
To that point, do you want to get assurances from Pete Hegseth that Space Command will be based in Alabama?
I want an assurance that it will be done fairly, and I got that from him. And I think that that's what we have to ask for. Absolutely. I asked him that when we were in the office, explained it to him. We want a fair process. We don't want one that's politically charged. And he said, absolutely, having a fair assessment of it, which we believe if that's done, that will be based in Alabama.
Let me ask you about a topic that's very personal for you, and that is this terrible tragedy in California and folks losing their homes to these wildfires. And it's personal for you because you lost your home to a terrible storm that came through Alabama a few years ago. There's a debate now in Congress about there's obviously going to be a need for federal aid for Californians, but there's now a debate, and the speaker has mentioned this himself, that some of that aid should be conditioned on policy changes from California. What's your view on that?
Look, so what J-Mart is saying, and I love that you're kind of like Cher or something, you just got one J-Mart. Like that's how everybody knows you. But what he is saying is, I had an opportunity to speak to this directly as someone who has experienced it myself. So back April 27th, 2011, by the grace of God, my husband and my children and I are still here. A tornado came through and literally took out multiple parts of Alabama, but our entire neighborhood and whatnot. I mean, we looked around and, had lost our cars, our things, our home, and in those moments, J-Mart, you don't realize what you don't have. So I had two essentially babies, a 1-year-old and a 2-year-old. And I remember waking up 2 nights later and needing to give my son baby Tylenol and not having it.
Right.
It's everything from simple things like that to realizing when you go to take your children back to school, you've got to get new Social Security cards and you've got to figure out where your insurance is because everything you have is gone. And so I think what we need to be doing right now is standing firmly with the people of California, letting them know they have our prayers, they have our support, and that we stand ready to be thoughtful about ways that we can help and making sure that they have the resources they need. That being said, obviously you're not just going to write a blank check. We have to be judicious with our dollars, and I think that we certainly will be, but I think the people of California need to know that America stands with them, and that's the message that I plan to send.
But you aren't drawing a line in the sand saying we're going to condition this aid, period.
You know, I'm certain that we'll have conversations about these things, but look, these people need our help.
Okay.
And so we've got to figure out how we do that. We have to do it smartly. You can't just continue to write the blank checks that we have been. We're $36 trillion in debt. But you definitely have to help people in need.
Sure.
We see that in North Carolina, we see that in other
Yes.
places, and these people need to know that we plan to help them as well.
You were elected 2 years ago, just a bit over 2 years ago. As we start this new Congress with new majorities in the Senate, the first bill on the floor is going to be a bill that you are the sponsor of, the Lehane Reilly Act. I guess, first off, just tell the crowd in short what the bill does.
Mm-hmm. So the Lehane Reilly Act, if many of you obviously followed in the news the tragedy of Lehane Reilly losing her life. And when you look at Lehane Reilly's killer, he had been charged both in New York for endangering a minor as well as a traffic violation, in addition to Georgia, where he had been charged with shoplifting. The point of this bill is that if you are here illegally, you've, number one, come across our border illegally, and then you commit a theft-related crime, and you are either charged with or convicted of, you will be detained throughout that process. And if this had been in place, Lehane Reilly would still be alive. And when you're looking at our country, we have 11 million people here illegally. There are 7.8 million of those people who are in removal proceedings. Of the 7.8 million, 1.4 million people have been given final orders of removal, which means that they've been given their due process, and we have said, you know, you need to be removed. Of that, when you look at the migrants in this pocket that have committed theft-related crimes, that's 66,000 migrants who are here illegally who then committed a theft-related crime. Of those 66,000, 59,000 of them have been given final orders of removal. And so what this essentially does is says if you commit a crime, then you're going to go to the front of the line for detention and therefore final orders of removal, deportation. One
of the concerns that I've heard expressed from Democrats is that this could, you know, really be a tad overzealous if you have a 17-year-old kid who, you know, stole a pack of gum from a 7-Eleven, and next thing you know, he's being detained and then deported. There's going to be amendments tonight, tomorrow. Are you open to some kind of amendments that would offer clarity on how minors are treated or perhaps dreamers are treated?
Yeah, so a couple of things on that. First, I'm glad to see my Democratic colleagues finally being concerned about minors that have come across our border illegally. If you look back over the last 4 years in the Biden administration, we've had 468,000 unaccompanied minors come across our border. Under the Biden administration, HHS has lost 150,000 unaccompanied minors. So I feel like if we want to make sure that these minors are safe and secure, that's absolutely where we start. When you talk about a candy bar of a 17-year-old filing, let's talk through that. First off, I think it undermines our law enforcement officers in general, because when you say charged with, you have to have probable cause and a bench warrant. So this isn't some kind of sort of flimsy thing. Second, if you look at what's happening in New York right now, New York migrant crime is running rampant. There are teen migrant gangs that are actually committing theft and burglary that have members as young as 11 years old. So when you're looking at the actual target, you know, that's what we're talking about. When my colleagues bring up DACA, so I dug into this. Do you know the youngest DACA recipient in the United States of America, out of the 536,000 people that were DACA recipients, is 17 years old. Out of the 536,000 DACA recipients, there are only 1,000 between the ages of 17 and 20. So the average age is 31, 35. So there's no such thing as a DACA kid. And so I think we have to be thoughtful about that. I think they're moving back to old talking points because they're looking for an excuse. You've seen the far left come out and say, we don't want this bill because they don't want progress. And at the end of the day, my colleagues are going to have to decide. They're going to have to make a choice. And that choice is whether they want to continue to protect open border policies of the Biden-Harris administration, or whether they want to protect American
But you're
families.
open to some kind of amendments.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We believe in getting back to regular order. And look, you've heard us talk about this ad nauseum, right?
Yes.
I mean, we are so sick. We've been in the minority, not having the opportunity to offer amendments to improve a bill, to have a vote up or down. So this is going to be a moment. It's a moment for John Thune and the way he leads. It's also a moment for Democrats. Are you going to come with pieces of legislation, with amendments that actually strategically improve the bill that you believe do? Now, we may not agree on that. Or are you going to come with something that expands the bill in an area that it doesn't go? This is not meant to be a comprehensive immigration bill.
Right.
This is a targeted bill, and we'll maintain that. Or are you going to bring an off-the-wall amendment that has nothing to do with the subject matter at all? So we are absolutely open to amendments. There's absolutely going to be amendments, and hopefully a lot of debate.
Let me ask you about a topic that's going to be in the news, I'm sure, this time next week, which is the matter of pardons. I don't know if you caught it, but your former colleague and soon-to-be Vice President J.D. Vance over the weekend said, quote, if you committed violence that day, meaning January 6th, obviously you shouldn't be pardoned. Where is your head on that, Senator, on pardons for those who were present at the Capitol on January 6th? Do you think that Senator Vance basically has it right that you got to punish those who committed violence against police officers?
Yeah, I'm with JD.
Okay. So you'd be uneasy with sort of a blanket pardon for anybody that was involved that day?
Look, I mean, I think if you look back, this is one of the things we continue to talk about DOJ and, you know, not politicizing things. You look back to the summer of 2020, and there were people who, you know, burned small businesses, government property, otherwise, that were never charged with anything.
Right.
And so looking at this, if there are people, though, that committed violence, obviously that's different. But yeah, I'm with JD.
Good. Let me ask you about the big news today on the Hill, which is the confirmation process finally getting underway for President Trump's cabinet. Where are you on the president's appointees? Do you want to sort of quickly approve all of them, or are you still examining them, and do you have some questions or concerns about any of these nominees?
Yeah, so obviously mentioned earlier, but take my Article 2, Section 2 duties very seriously.
Advising consent,
Advising consent, and that's the process that I've been going through. I obviously give the president great deference in all of this, and every nominee that I have met with has answered my questions fully and satisfactorily, and has been transparent. And we've had some really tough back and forth in my office. I think that's necessary.
Like what?
You know, some of the questions that you've seen raised, whether it's Pete Hegseth or whether it talking to Robert Kennedy about different things when it comes to the life issue and whose policies lead there. So I've asked those questions. I've asked the questions that are in the media, and the answers that I've gotten from each and every one of them have been transparent and direct, and I appreciate that, and I think that's what the American people are going to see through this. So at this point, all of the nominees that I have met with and had the opportunity to vet personally are people that I will support. Obviously, this process goes through with committee hearings and that type of thing, and so the American people will have an opportunity to see that for themselves.
What did Hegseth say when you raised the issue about his treatment of women?
I talked with him right there, obviously with his wife as well, and he committed to ensuring that women have opportunity in the armed forces, and that there are no allegations, truthful allegations of mistreatment of women. And so we talked through.
He denied the claims that he committed sexual assault.
Correct.
Yeah.
And I asked if there were any additional claims that would come out. No.
You're a student and a member of the Senate. Do you expect all of these nominees to get through?
I do.
Yeah. Let me ask you about a topic that I know is dear to your heart personally and politically, which is these things, our phones, and kids' use of phones. I'm not sure if you saw this, but the new governor and the former senator, speaking of the Senate, of New Hampshire, Kelly Ayotte, came out the day of her inauguration, said that in New Hampshire schools, they were going to ban phones.
Yes.
Do you want to see a version of that in all 50 states?
Look, obviously.
Blocking kids' access to phones during the school day?
Did you have a phone when you were in school?
I'm too old for that.
Right. And did you turn out okay?
Well, ask some of your colleagues. They have different views of that.
Look, my children are going through this right now. Their school, the administration of their school obviously read a lot of the literature that's out there that many of us have read and have chosen to go in that direction this year. It's interesting to listen to my kids. So my kids are 14 and 15. So you can imagine when I typically get phone calls from them, it is because their friends are asking them, is your mom really for banning TikTok? Call your mom, see if she's gonna vote for it. I'm like, it's not a ban. It is actually moving it out of the control of the CCP. But we've had some very spirited conversations in our home about this very topic. But yes, if you're asking me, do we need to do more? Absolutely.
On the state level?
Look,
or federal level?
I hope that the states will lead.
Yeah.
I hope they will lead. But I think it's important for us to push this conversation from a federal level as well. I mean, I have partnered with Brian Schatz and Chris Murphy on this, and myself and Tom Cotton, and then myself and Ted Cruz. Those are not four people that you typically see pushing on one issue. But we've all come to the table, not as Democrats or Republicans, not as people on the left or the right, but people that we're parents. We are parents of teenagers. We are seeing the effects not only within our home, but with our friends and their parenting experience, and what we're seeing for our children's friends as well. And y'all, we have to put up some guardrails. I know you know this, but the data speaks for itself. I mean, when you have 1 in 3 high school young women saying she actually considered taking her own life last year, and then you have 9% of our high school population, like 9, saying that they actually attempted death by suicide, doing nothing is not an option. So I'm going to keep pushing this and partnering with people across the aisle.
You mentioned TikTok. Let me just ask you real fast. The courts appear to be on the way to banning TikTok if they don't divest from their Chinese ownership. Where do you come down on that? You're supportive of banning TikTok, I assume?
Yeah, look, if you look at the CCP and the data they're collecting on everyday Americans and the use of algorithms, particularly against our young people, we've got to be smart, and giving them an opportunity to divest those interests allows Americans to still be able to utilize the app. But ultimately, we've got to stop giving the Chinese Communist Party the upper hand at every turn, especially when it comes to our most valuable resource and asset and future, and that is our kids.
Were you surprised that President-elect Trump invited Xi Jinping to his inauguration, by the way?
No, look, I think you've seen this from Trump. I think he cast a wide net when it comes to building coalitions, and also that peace through strength that he hopes to achieve. And that many times comes through dialogue, it comes through meetings, and it comes through seeing each other eye to eye, not necessarily figuratively, but like actually literally.
He has an open hand. You mentioned your work with Senator Schatz and Murphy, but the most remarkable coalition, I think, may be the Britt-Fetterman relationship. Now, the student body president from Bama and the hoodie-wearing fellow who lives next to a steel mill in Western PA is not exactly the friendship that I would have guessed, but you guys have become friends, and your spouses too. Like, how did that happen? And sort of take us into, like, what's that vibe like? I mean, what are you guys discussing?
Yeah, I was actually texting with him this morning. So we became friends at orientation. So, and if you rewind to that moment, I mean, that was not a moment where he had been embraced by the right at all. And
now, this is a good point. This is the sort of pre-Fetterman, when he was still the Bernie Sanders backing Fetterman, not like the Fetterman now, who's kind of like what John McCain was for Democrats for many years, right?
Well, the point is,
the right's favorite Democrat.
We just came off of an election, and it was a very contentious election between Democrats and Republicans, if people remember. And at orientation,
there were nasty things said about him too.
We struck up a friendship, and Wesley struck up a friendship with Giselle, and it was something we maintained. I was texting with Giselle, where are y'all staying for swearing in? And we're going to take the kids on the floor if y'all want to go. And we've continued that friendship. And to be truthful with you, when he was courageous enough to say, hey, I have some mental health challenges, and I'm going to seek treatment, I think that's a moment we should all celebrate. Because you think about how hard it is to have challenging conversations, even with the people who you love most and love you most. And for him to do that in front of the world, I think was a beacon of hope and courage. And I think it is an example for others to follow. And so we maintain that friendship. He asked me to come visit him when he was there.
In the hospital, I remember that.
To be trusted enough to be in that space, I always want to be worthy of that trust. And we've continued that friendship. He calls, so, as you know, John is a big guy. And so is my husband. So my husband is 6'8", 320. He likes to say he's not quite 320 anymore, so he'd like...
3 teens, there you go.
Yeah, there you go. But John calls him the big unit. He's always like, how's the big unit? How's he doing? Which is pretty great because the two of them like are basically the same size. But yes, great people, he and Giselle. Obviously, we don't see eye to eye on many issues,
Right.
but I think we both share the same philosophy, which is if you have a common goal with someone on the other side of the aisle, you have a duty to the people you serve to get in the room and try to figure out.
But you were Fetterman before it was cool, though, and now he's kind of drifting to the right. And he's become one of the co-sponsors of the Lake and Riley bill, and you guys are doing TV. Do you think he would have moved like that had you not had the relationship with him early on at a personal level? Does the personal help the political, I guess is what I'm saying?
Look, John has very strong convictions, and John's going to do what John thinks is best, regardless of who else is on board. And you have seen that across the board in a multitude of places that he's done. Where I do think that our true friendship helps is the ability to have those conversations. We have a bill, Stop the Scroll. We have, a number of things that we're working on together, even behind the scenes. And I think that that's where friendships help, because you have to both trust and respect the people that you're working with. Because if you don't do that, then you can't be honest about the things that need to happen, or, kind of sort of where, okay, well, I don't really agree with this, or, what about this? Because if that person's gonna walk right out to a camera and talk about, what the issues you have with, or kind of where you need to, then you're not gonna have the conversation to start with. And then what happens is there's no progress in this country. There's no ability to move good things forward. So friendships that are built on trust and respect help with that.
This is important to you, I know. We worked across the aisle to get stuff done, which obviously in Trump's first term, that was challenging. Do you feel like because of the nature of his victory that Democrats are now more willing to work with you guys instead of going to the barricades and trying to get stuff done, especially on issues that are not hot button issues?
Yeah, I definitely think this is a different posture than before. So I was here previously as chief of staff. This is a different posture from Democrats. I think they understand that America has spoken. I think they also understand they've lost touch with many people in America, and I think you're seeing them work to do that. When you look at things like what we'll see over the next few days, this will be interesting for y'all to watch with the Lake and Riley Act. Back to friendships in this freshman class that we have. Another dear friend of mine is Peter Welch.
From Vermont.
From Vermont.
Yes.
And
he was a freshman at 70, wasn't he?
I love it. And we obviously do not see eye to eye on many things.
From Vermont? No, I guess not, yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
I tell people in Alabama, they're like, Vermont. I'm like, yeah, like Bernie Sanders, Vermont.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, got it. But truly, Peter is committed to figuring out how do we get back to some semblance of regular order, and I think that he will be a driving force on the Democratic side of how do we bring amendments that we truly believe will improve the bill, and how do we get back to working together in a more productive way.
We're running out of time here. I have to ask you one very important final question, though. I couldn't help but notice that when the AP Top 25 college basketball poll came out this week, they had Auburn #1 and Bama #4. Senator, some straight talk. Is Alabama now a basketball state?
You know what? We're going to own that for just a little bit, for sure. We're going to regroup on the football side, and right now we're really focused on we're focused on basketball season.
You're going to regroup. That's a good euphemism.
Do you like that?
Ever the politician.
Do you
Katie,
like that?
Britt, thanks y'all. Appreciate it very much. Thank you guys.
Please welcome American Security Project's Director of AI Imperative 2030, Courtney Manning.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us for today's panel on AI and national security in the first 100 days of Trump's second presidency. For centuries, humanity's greatest barrier to progress has been the lack of information needed to solve complex challenges. Today, the opposite is true. Amidst a converging permacrisis of great power competition, political polarization, economic inequality, and climate change, unprecedented volumes of data on these issues, true and false, have spread across the world and are spreading across the world every second. This torrent of colliding variables is both a resource and a curse. with the number of new and compelling discoveries frequently surpassing the ability of policymakers to interpret, integrate, and act on them. AI's capacity to analyze vast data sets, identify patterns, and generate actionable insights is uniquely suited to cut through this fog and noise. It has become a force multiplier of human discovery, driving innovation in sectors from healthcare and education to defense and critical infrastructure. It offers tools to address asymmetric threats, strengthen our communication, and protect our democratic institutions. It can also be used to develop weaponized autonomous warfare systems, large-scale disinformation campaigns, and biological weapons. In line with this enormous potential and risk, global pursuit of AI leadership has become more than economic prosperity and the chase. It is synonymous with the pursuit of global power and influence, with the winner shaping not only AI's future, but the future of human progress. There is no doubt that the United States faces an imperative to lead the world in AI. The Chinese Communist Party's increasingly aggressive pursuit of AI, coupled with its dangerous dearth of ethical guardrails, pose a stark contrast to the safety-first governance of European and American policymakers. Its investments are paying dividends. Through a combination of economic espionage, civil-military fusion, and state-driven capitalism, Chinese developers are engineering AI models that deliver similarly advanced performance as leading US equivalents at a fraction of the cost, compute, and chips. After being transferred to China's military and state intelligence agencies, these technologies are used to oppress ethnic minorities, control foreign critical infrastructure, and conduct pervasive espionage against American citizens and firms. General Secretary Xi Jinping's regime of territorial encroachment, surveillance, and authoritarianism cannot be the vision for humanity's future. However, we must ensure that the bold pursuit of American AI means more than simply outpacing the threat. The technologies we build and the guardrails we place must reflect the best of who we are as a nation. American AI dominance is about shaping a safer, more equitable, and more resilient world for future generations. If we do not, the global AI race risks becoming a race to the bottom. That's where we step in. American Security Project is a nonpartisan research organization forged on bipartisan consensus of current and retired congresspeople, generals and admirals, and leading subject matter experts. We launched AI Imperative 2030 to push American AI forward, to bring clarity to the disparate perspectives that currently overwhelm the AI landscape, and to place freedom front and center. This year, we'll be convening AI accelerators, dreamers, doers, doomers, and everyone in between to have informed conversations about AI governance and the research needed to inform it in Congress and beyond. Here's an exclusive pitch to kick us off today. We're releasing a new report in the next hour, China's AI Surge, highlighting the 3 critical resources necessary for American AI leadership over China. These resources are energy, compute, and chips. And despite our best efforts over the past 2 administrations to control them, the race to secure them stays neck and neck. In the next 100 days and beyond, AI will be the coalescing force driving important conversations around democracy, progress, and US values. But more than that, artificial intelligence is a mirror that forces us to grapple with what it means to be human, to not just absorb and analyze information, but to determine what sets the human spirit apart from an intelligent machine. AI may be capable of processing complexity at scale, but it cannot tell us what matters most to us. That is a uniquely human responsibility, and one that we must not abdicate. Thank you. Oh, I thought you were handing that to me.
All right. Thank you very much for that. I was going to introduce the next guest, but I think Steve Bannon just had me deported. It did say 100% moratorium, didn't he? It's a little awkward for me, but as long as I'm still here, I should say we've got lots more coming up this morning. Speaker Mike Johnson will be on this stage shortly with our very own Rachel Bade. And before that, and you can see the furniture being moved behind me, we have an exciting panel coming up now on the topic you've just been hearing about, topic that's going to dominate all of our lives as we know over the next few years, artificial intelligence. I'm going to welcome onto the stage a bunch of people that understand AI way better than I do. Politico Tech's host Stephen Overly is going to moderate the conversation on American competitiveness in AI. They're going to focus on national security and on the race against China. And joining him on the panel, we'll have the newly elected senator for Utah, John Curtis. He's a Republican. We've got the Honorable Nazak Nikakhtar, a partner at Wiley Rein LLP, who leads its national security practice there. He's also a former assistant secretary at the Department for Commerce under President Trump. And then on the other side of the fence, we have the Democratic Congressman Bera of California, and we have Chris Lehane, who's OpenAI's Vice President of Global Affairs. Please welcome them all onto the stage right now. Thank you.
All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our panel discussion on the global AI race and the future of geopolitical power. My name is Stephen Overly. I host the daily Politico Tech podcast. I'm thrilled to be here with our panelists. I talk a lot on the podcast about AI and its vast implications, and I don't think that the consequences or potential consequences are really any more significant than when we talk about national security, whether that's competition with China, the war in Ukraine. Fundamentally, whoever dominates in AI is going to wield significant geopolitical power. And so that's the backdrop of our conversation. I do want to start our conversation with some news this morning, which many of you may have seen. The Biden administration signed an executive order effectively directing the Department of Defense and the Department of Energy to identify government sites where AI data centers can be built. Senator Curtis, I'm curious to come to you as someone who I know is very focused on AI, energy, and infrastructure. What's your reaction to this latest news?
Well, to put things in perspective, in Utah, my home state, 2/3 of that state is owned by the federal government. So if you're not looking at federal land, you're taking 2/3 of the map off of the equation. And then think about this. Think about trying to transmit energy if you can't go across that 2/3 of the state. So this is really good news. I'm anxious to learn more about it. And I tend to think, as I was thinking about this morning, I'm thinking about, like, I can picture in my mind a AI center hooking up to a fire hydrant and no water coming out. And that's what I feel like it's going to be for power, right? Like at current trajectory rate, we're going to be out of power and they're going to hook up and nothing's going to come out.
Chris, I want to come to you to build on that. OpenAI is one of the supporters of ASP's AI Imperative 2030 project. I know you've also argued that data centers and energy are sort of key ingredients if the US is going to beat China in AI. Does this morning's executive order actually move the needle in a meaningful way, do you think? And what does it leave out?
So if you think about AI infrastructure, I'm always reminded of a book that I may or may not have read in the late 90s, Guns, Germs, and Steel, right? And that book made the case that countries succeeded, nations succeeded when they were able to marshal their natural resources, national resources, and get a competitive advantage. If you think about AI as the electricity of our generation, how we work, how we play, how we live, it's going to impact everything. But to be able to prevail on AI, for democratic US-led AI, to continue to lead the world, that's ultimately an infrastructure exercise. And the guns, germs, and steel of this era is going to be chips, it's going to be data, it's going to be talent, and it's going to be the energy piece. And so to get specifically to your question, I think what the Biden administration has put out today does send an interesting signal in the following way. We've identified that there's roughly $175 billion of dry capital out there globally looking to invest in AI infrastructure. There's an understanding that there's going to be such a need for it, in part driven by the geopolitics that we'll get into, that there's an interesting return model on it. Question for this country is, there's two countries that can build AI at scale, the US and China. Do we want that $175 billion coming into here to invest in the US to create jobs and economic activity, or do we want it going to the PRC? And the biggest obstacle, if you think of the economics of And I don't even think of these as data centers, by the way. I think of them as almost supercomputer laboratories. They're data centers is a little bit, to use a cliche, like your parents' Oldsmobile type of thing, if I can age myself. But the biggest challenge is you have to buy your energy at the front end, and then you're ultimately going to sell your compute on the back end. And for people who are investing their money, how long is it going to take the delta between buying the electricity and then selling the compute? And so what you get with the Biden administration today is, at least from a signaling perspective, at least on federal land, trying to short the timeline between when you can get your project shovels in the ground and then the project going forward. So I think from a signaling perspective, putting an emphasis on the fact that we do need to get to a place where we go from thinking big to acting big to actually ultimately building big.
We're talking about the first 100 days of the next administration. Yep. If this is sort of a signaling exercise, what's a tangible step that the next administration can take in the first 100 days to advance on that and actually make a real tangible impact?
So Senator mentioned, was it 2/3 of Utah is right. Public land? I think that's fairly unique to Utah, but obviously there's public lands all over the country. But I do think, can we take this basic concept and figure out a way to work with states potentially on non-public land to be able to expedite the building process? I think that's going to require having to give the state some kind of incentives to be able to move forward. I think some of the challenges around data centers have been, would the states really benefit from this? They get some construction jobs, they get some operations jobs, they get some revenue. Those are all good things. But can the states actually begin to think about these data centers as being larger AI ecosystem economic development opportunities? So something that we at OpenAI have suggested is, you look at a data center potentially needs 1 gigawatt of energy. That's a lot of energy. That's about the size of what Portland, Oregon takes in energy. Could you potentially have a certain segment of that compute allocated for that state purposes? So if it's 1 gigawatt, maybe 250 megawatts go to compute. That state can then use it to stand up its own AI ecosystem, so they're not just getting the jobs from the building, they're actually building out a sustainable economic model for themselves. And you give that in return for the state expediting the building process. So I think the signal today is we do need to address the timelines to get this stuff built, particularly given the imperatives, and we'll get into this on China. Right. But as we think about the federal level, and we have a senator and congressperson who are here who can talk about this, you do get a sense that there's maybe an emerging interest in doing a big infrastructure type of legislation. Maybe it's one bill, maybe it's several bills, but beginning to think about how you can create those incentives for the states.
Congressman Bera, I want to come to you. In this executive order this morning, notably one of the requirements it puts on companies that build these data centers is that they have to be built using clean energy. And to me, it's sort of a prime example when we talk about AI and national security of some of the trade-offs and considerations, right? Do you rush to develop this technology, or even at the expense of climate goals or at the expense of labor goals? And we've seen a lot from this administration trying to balance those. I'm curious, from your perspective, is it a fair trade? If you get government land to build a data center, you have to use clean energy?
I think it is, and I think there's a bipartisan opportunity here. If we think about modular nuclear energy, it's going to be easier to do that under a Republican administration than it would have been under a Democratic administration. Is that a place where I think there are enough of us on the Democratic side that think that technology is moving forward, relatively safe, very clean? Bill Gates has invested a lot in this area. Could we find bipartisan agreement? Because the energy needs of these data centers of AI are going to be huge. It's not going to be wind or solar. It's going to be new sources of energy. And I think that is an area where we could find some bipartisan agreement to move forward. The other things that, another announcement that the Biden administration recently made was these advanced manufacturing centers. I think there's one coming to Sunnyvale. I think that is a real smart investment to put federal resources into that next generation of chip to make sure we continue to keep the lead. But again, modular nuclear energy is, I think, an area that we could probably work together on.
You know, it's been a big week for sort of last-minute AI policy pushes with days left in this administration. But yesterday, the Commerce Department also announced new export controls, effectively restricting the sale of microchips used to develop artificial intelligence, and that included country caps, not just on rivals like China, but even on some US allies. And Nazak, I want to come to you. This is your wheelhouse. In the first Trump administration, you oversaw export controls. I mean, will these new restrictions actually hamper kind of US adversaries in the way that they sort of have been promised? And with this new administration coming in, do you expect them to follow through on this?
Yeah, that's a great question. But I wanted to, before or leading into that, I kind of wanted to talk about the China competition generally, because that's probably one of the reasons why we're talking about AI and national security,
of course,
right?
Yeah.
And when we're evaluating China competition, you know, I see a lot of things in the news about how the U.S. is, you know, leading China, but I've seen this story before for the last 25 years. Every time we've gotten arrogant and thought, you know, in chips, in batteries, and whatever, autos, we're so far ahead of China. China races and catches up and then beats us, right? So we have to remain vigilant. And when we think about AI in the context of the elements, right? The hardware, the chips, which we're going to get to, the software, the language models, data, energy, the money that goes into it. China is going to invest about between $1 to $2 trillion over the next 10 years in AI. Regulations, infrastructure, and workforce. We have to think about all of those elements in terms of competition, right? One or two aren't enough across the board, which then brings us to the chip controls, right? And I 100% think that the Trump administration is going to, they'll agree with the imperative, but the execution was enormously flawed, right? We're putting arbitrary caps for countries on compute power rather than using chip diplomacy, right? If we are the preeminent AI chip designers, et cetera, then we have to use chip diplomacy to get countries to work with us rather than move to China. And yes, maybe China's AI chips are a little bit further behind, but they can put more together to get the same compute power. But arbitrary caps make no sense. We export the chips. We give American businesses the opportunity to get in those markets. But then the China restrictions would be end user restrictions, right? If these data centers, whatever, are going to be helping adversaries, then that's the limitation on export controls. So yes, we're moving in the right direction. Execution, horribly flawed. I think, and I'm hopeful that the Trump administration will fix it.
Senator Curtis, is this a rush job or is this smart policy?
I have this problem. I want to answer all their questions. Let me just say, it feels a little bit like somebody's got to say the emperor has no clothes. If you say we're going to let you do these on public lands, but they have to be clean energy, well, it's going to take 5 years at the fastest, and probably more like 10 years to do that with nuclear, right? Where are the minerals going to come from? And are the solar panels going to be built here in the United States? And I think we really are not, we're kind of fooling ourselves in many respects in not only what you've just said, but on the energy side of this. Well, it's great to say, okay, we are now opening up these lands to do this. Where is the energy going to come from? And if you put restrictions on that, it's just not, it's not going to happen. And I think we have to be just more realistic with the volume of energy that we are talking about to do what needs to be done. It's going to be natural gas. And long term, it can be nuclear, and renewables can layer it on top of that, but I don't think anybody sees a path forward to provide this. And so let's be honest about that. And then let's talk about, well, how do we make natural gas clean, right? And I think those are questions that are far better questions if we really think that we're going to build these type of AI facilities. And if we don't, guess what? They'll be built overseas and they'll use coal.
Actually, the senator touches on an important point also that we should tease out. The semiconductor manufacturing relies on critical minerals. It relies on these industrial diamonds, cubic boron nitride that go into all the cutting tools that China controls. The dominant share. China controls critical minerals processing. China controls super abrasives, et cetera. And so those supply chains are exclusively in China. We have no hope of beating China and manufacturing and chips, et cetera, unless we get our act together and reshore all of the components, the onshore or friendshore, but make sure that we have long-term, secure, stable supply chains if we're even going to be in this race. I think everybody gets so excited about the applications rather than think, and we should, but we should also think about how do we do this? What are the inputs that go into making this stuff? Those are really, really important, and I appreciate your flagging that as well.
I want to come to Congressman Bera and Senator Curtis with this question, because whenever I talk to members of Congress about their AI priorities, national security or otherwise, I start to hear this sound in my head, ka-ching, ka-ching, ka-ching. It all sounds expensive, and candidly, we have a Republican-controlled Congress that has talked a lot about putting checks on spending, right? So I guess my question for each of you, from where the aisles you sit in, how do you convince lawmakers, or do you need to convince lawmakers to actually spend on these AI priorities?
Well, I would like to use AI in my office. Let's start with that, right? Like the burdens that are put on us ourselves, even to use it, are astounding. And so, first of all, I don't have a lot of confidence that Congress fully gets this and understands it, and members of Congress do. But I tend to think, to answer your questions, like, our job is to put the guardrails on this thing, and the free market is ready to roll. Right? I think the only thing that's holding this thing back is not money, it's the guardrails. And when we don't put guardrails out, everybody's scared, right? Like, if you don't know what you can expect and what the rules are going to be, it's hard to make those type of investments. And my guess is, if we did our job, put the guardrails out there, free market would go crazy.
I'm going to agree with the senator. If there is a priority in the first 100 days, it is, what do those guardrails look like? Obviously, in my home state in California, the state legislator tried to put some guardrails up. Our delegation pushed back a little bit, because we can't have 50 different regulatory regimes. We should try to figure this out. How do we get that right so we don't stifle innovation, but we also protect the public as well? And we didn't do it around social media, and now we're trying to do it, and it's too late. It's really hard to do. AI is moving really fast. I think there is a priority. Put the spending aside, there's a priority for us to figure that out in a nonpartisan way that allows us to have this innovative ecosystem, but also sets those guardrails at the right place.
Can I connect two dots here real quick?
Please.
I think your point earlier on, like, where this competition really stands is incredibly important. For those who are not in AI, the PRC released a model in December called DeepSeek. DeepSeek competes with the best models in the US. So this idea, and you were hitting on this, that we're way ahead on this is just not the case. And the stakes couldn't be higher. I wouldn't typically quote Vladimir Putin, but he's gotten this right when he says that whoever wins the AI race wins the world. The CCP, she has said that China wants to be the dominant player by 2030. They did 10 nukes in the last year alone, 10 more coming. They're an authoritarian state. They control all the data. The data goes into these. I think we are ahead in the chips, but they can throw massive resources at these. And the specific idea, if I could just, again, connect the dots here, one of the things, and both members here, you guys will spend time thinking about this and be smarter on it, but the US government is going to have to buy compute for US government purposes. I mentioned earlier, $175 billion out there looking to invest. They need to make sure the economics work from a return model. If the US government can basically do a backstop by prepaying, or at least committing to buying that compute, it actually unlocks that capital to come into this country to invest into these data centers. And so that's how you can really get an interesting, potential avenue for an interesting public-private approach. Government has to buy this. They're going to have to do it anyhow. If you make those commitments, you bring the capital in globally to then expedite the build-out of the data centers that we need. Those data centers, in turn, become infrastructure as destiny. They become effectively our AI arsenal of democracy as we go forward to ensure that we beat China.
And I want to stress, where America has fallen behind in competition with China is because we haven't had sort of a serious whole of government strategy.
Coherent
to
strategy,
forward.
yes, couldn't
We're
agree more.
completely fragmented. One agency is doing one thing, another agency is doing it. We need to bring it all together. The Trump administration needs to bring, and I know the term moonshot is overused, but for lack of a better term and something everybody understands, we need a moonshot in chips, we need a moonshot in AI, and that all of that starts with the whole of government strategy.
And we've done it before.
Yes.
The U.S. is great at doing big things. That's what makes this country special. It's our superpower.
How do you bring it all together? I mean, should Trump come in and set up a Department of Artificial Intelligence?
No, I mean, that's exactly what the National Security Council is there for, right? I mean, they've got to make AI an imperative. I mean, I don't know if you all have seen the Chinese robots, but they are incredible, and they're functioning with AI, and they're going to proliferate the world in a few years, and China is going to potentially win the AI race. We're at the cusp of either winning or losing everything, because AI is really going to be everything. And so it's going to be the National Security Council, and they need to bring technical experts from the outside, right? And agency experts to figure out how does each agency weave together its authority into a comprehensive, executable, expedient AI strategy.
You know, Congressman Bera, we're talking about the first 100 days of the Trump administration. One thing we know the president has promised to do is revoke Biden's 2023 AI executive order, which set up the U.S. AI Safety Institute and sort of had a number of directives for agencies to kind of cultivate AI-focused policies. If that is scrapped, you know, as soon as a week from now, what are the implications for national security?
Yeah, so I don't think it's a great idea, or if it is scrapped, what replaces it? Because you've got national security, but then you've got AI that is going to be part of our everyday life, transportation systems. I focus a lot on AI and healthcare. That stuff's already moving. How do we make sure that is safe and efficacious and folks are protected there? So if it does get replaced, I'd be curious what the Trump administration puts in its hand, because safety is a big concern of those guardrails. The other interesting thing that we're going to be watching is the president is going to be surrounded by a lot of tech talent in there. Like if you look at some of his nominees, I'm not sure what Elon Musk is going to do in here, and they don't all agree on how we should approach AI, right? So I think there's going to be hopefully it's creative tension within the administration that comes out with good ideas, but I think there is going to be a lot of tech talent in this administration.
Do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, so I can't help, as I'm listening to this conversation, I'm hearing Ronald Reagan in my head. I'm here from the government and I'm here to help. And does that scare anybody, right? I think government has to be super careful here. I'll give my own home state, Utah, a shout out. And they've done some really creative legislation on this. They've actually created...
Leading the country in a lot of
yeah,
this stuff.
They've got, they call it a sandbox, where you can try and experiment on ideas. And what I've heard the term, we don't want to stifle this. That is so true. If we're not careful, in our good intentions, we will stifle this. The other thing is, if you look at how we've regulated, for instance, on technology in the past, we tend to pick a point in time and we pass legislation based upon what we know. And well, now we're trying to run the internet based on legislation decades and decades and decades ago. And I think also, we have to somehow legislate in a way that moves with this and is adaptive to what we learn as we go forward with AI. That's not easy to do, and that's the reason we haven't done it yet, but I do think it's incredibly important that we figure this out.
Let me ask you a follow-up question that's been on my mind, because as much as AI is a race, it's not one that the U.S. is running alone. I think in many ways, a big difference between the Trump administration and the Biden administration has been their rhetoric toward U.S. allies. And we've even seen, obviously, President Trump talk about sweeping tariffs. We've seen threats to annex Canada. Is there a risk that his style, his approach, undermines kind of the global relationships that the U.S. needs here when it comes to AI and national security?
All I can tell you is we have 4 years of prior experience, and there's lots of fear of that, but I don't think any of that actually played out. And I'll bet on U.S. all day long. In my opinion, as long as we don't ruin it, this is going to happen here in the United States. And the most important thing is that the House and the Senate just don't get in the way of this. We put the appropriate guardrails out, and I'll bet on U.S. leadership and innovation every day, all day long, as long as we don't ruin it.
We were running out of time, but I want to try to get one more question in, and I'll start with you, Chris, on this, because I want the industry perspective here. You know, there's an expectation, I think, that the Trump administration will defend American tech companies on the global stage, perhaps more than the Biden administration has, whether that's related to regulations coming out of Europe, for instance, on digital markets or artificial intelligence. I'm curious if that is, in fact, your expectation, and as you look at the first 100 days, is there some sort of stand that you would like to see this new administration take for big tech?
Well, I think we're looking at it from the tech perspective, and specifically AI, is something that I think has sort of been touched on and almost by everyone on this panel, which is an overarching, what I would sort of call coherent or holistic theory of the case strategy. I'll touch on something I said earlier. That DeepSeek model is a equivalent of a Sputnik moment in AI. Like, this country reacted to Sputnik in the 50s by putting its foot on the gas pedal and winning. We absolutely have to play to win. I do think that this is an administration that has coming in that has made very clear that when it thinks about AI, there's two things it's looking at. One, national security. Two, economic competitiveness. Two sides of the same coin. And so I think my hope or our aspiration is that you're going to get an overarching strategy that is going to come at it to deliver on those two goals, those two outputs, and with the urgency that this moment demands. Because this is a zero-sum game. The U.S. absolutely has to win this, because winning is going to dictate whether the world is built on free, democratic AI rails or whether it's going to be built on authoritarian, autocratic AI rails, and we have to win that.
Well, that is unfortunately all the time we have. I could go on and on about this, but I want to thank our panelists for joining us and providing such great insights, and I'd like to thank all of you for being here.
Hello, hello, hello. They didn't tell me I was going to be blocked there. You guys having fun? Learning some things? Thank you for the whistle. I appreciate that. As things start getting cleaned up here, I want to play a little game. Everyone who's already subscribed to Playbook, raise your hand. Okay, the rest of you, including those watching online, I want you to go to your phone, go to politico.com/playbook. I want you to sign up. I get paid, you get information, it's good for everybody. As you guys know, we come out Monday through Friday every morning, Saturday through Sunday every morning, and also we have Playbook PM. Lots of new information as we get this new team going. We have some exciting things in store, so you don't want to miss it. I don't see a lot of phones moving. You right there, you good? You signed up? You're good? Okay, we're good. As we're good here, I want to introduce back to the stage Senator Curtis. He is being interviewed by our head of news, Alex Burns.
Oh, wait. Nice music.
Well, thanks for sticking around for the overtime session.
Yeah, I know what you're thinking. Yes, it was me. I was just out here.
Well, listen, you've touched on a number of the important topics of the new administration already, and the event is about the first 100 days of a new president.
Yeah.
I want to take a couple minutes, though, to talk about the outgoing president. Sure. And I'm curious, your experience of the Biden administration, how engaged has the president been with you? Like, have you heard from him? Have you met with him?
No. I think as a Republican in the House, I didn't expect to. But we had, as a Republican in the House, I would say it was close to zero interaction. I was invited down to the White House, I think, for one bill signing.
What was the bill, do you remember?
It was early on in administration. I don't. I'll just brag. We passed 27 bills in that time, and so we were pretty active. But there was not a lot of interaction.
But you've never spoken to President Biden?
Oh, only in a very formal setting where there were lots of other people. Does that make sense?
Well, it makes, I mean, I understand what you're describing. I'm not sure it makes sense to me, right? And that I understand that you're a House Republican. There's an awfully tight majority, right? And you have expressed interest in, you have a record of working on a bipartisan basis on a number of issues that are of some significance to this administration. So did you truly have zero expectation that there'd be a phone call?
Zero.
Really?
Yeah.
Were there?
Sorry.
No.
No, I think a lot of it comes from, look, in the House, there's 435 of you. As a Republican, you know, you're not on the first part of his call list to begin with. And I don't know, but I would assume most of my colleagues don't wake up in the morning thinking the president's going to call me today.
You are the only one that founded the Conservative Climate Caucus, though, right?
Yes.
And do you feel like there would have been an opportunity to work together if there had been outreach?
And I will tell you, John Kerry was amazing. So John Kerry was very, very in tune with the work that I was doing. He met with us, he talked with us. Secretary Granholm was very engaged. So to be fair, while the president wasn't himself, there were several people on his team who were really watching what we were doing and wanting us to be successful.
And what do you think the role is for that group of Republicans in this administration?
So just in case everybody's not totally familiar with that, maybe I can just do a top line. A number of years ago, I was a little concerned that Republicans weren't engaging in the climate conversation. So I did what everybody suggested I shouldn't do. And I jumped in with both feet. I founded the Conservative Climate Caucus to get Republicans engaged. People kind of patted me on the back and said, you'll get 5 Republicans that will join. And I'm just here to tell you that today there's 87 House Republicans that are part of the Conservative Climate Caucus. Now to answer your question, the role is incredibly important. And the reason why is if you have a conversation as something as significant as policy, and I don't think you can separate climate policy from energy policy. And in the last conversation we just had about energy is so critical. If you just say 1/2 of Congress is going to show up to that conversation, you're not going to get the best answers. So if Republicans aren't showing up for that conversation, if we're not showing up for the climate conversation, we're not showing up for the energy conversation. And I think it's incredible to get the best policy that Republicans are there and we're articulating our solutions and we're debating their solutions and we're coming to the best conclusions.
Do you think President Trump, do you think you could persuade?
I have a feeling I don't know where this is going.
Well, when you say if you're not showing up for the climate conversation, you're not really showing up for the energy conversation.
Correct.
It doesn't seem that that's the way President Trump sees it himself.
You know, it's hard to know, but I will tell you, if you look at his appointees, we're going to have some real serious energy/climate conversations. And I'm just here to tell you, the narrative has been that to be clean, you have to give up affordability, you have to give up reliability, you have to give up energy dominance. And I think this is where the Republican voice is important, is wait a minute, you don't. You can be clean, you can hang on to affordability, you can hang on to reliability, and you can be energy dominant and clean at the same time. And while you may not hear the president say that, I think if you look at his appointees, that resonates. And by the way, as they're all coming, whether they're related to energy or not, as they come to me and my Senate role, I'm having this conversation with all of them about my work on the climate and how I'm hoping they can help me.
Who do you see among those people who you've met with or among the broader cast of characters in this administration as in tune with the clean part of that conversation?
Yeah.
Energy dominance, all of them, right?
Yeah, well, you know, I just came from the House. I was on the Energy and Commerce Committee, and when I showed up 7 years ago, if climate came up in a hearing, it was a debate about the science. By the time I left, if climate came up, it was now a debate about methods. And how do we get affordable, reliable, clean? That was the conversation. And I think you're going to hear that more and more from Republicans. I think you're going to see that. And maybe to be more specific with your question, everybody that comes in, whether it's Lee Zeldin with EPA, obviously a lot of connection there, but even Pete Hegseth on DOD, I'm talking to him about that role and the role of energy and all of those things. And it's hard to find one topic that spans every part of the administration as much as energy.
Tell me a little bit more about your conversation with with Pete Hegseth?
Oh, shoot, I shouldn't have brought that up. Listen, to me, I take very seriously the role that the Senate has in the Constitution for advice and consent. And so when Mr. Hegseth came to see me, I had done quite a bit of research on him, but not enough. And so I asked him, I said, give me 4 or 5 names of people that you want me to talk to who can tell me who the real Pete is. And I'm very well aware, as an elected official, that what's out there in the news may or may not be accurate. And I wanted to know exactly what was accurate. And so he gave me 4 or 5 names. I've called them all, and I've called some additional people that he didn't give me because I want to know who he really is. I smiled at him and I said, you've written a number of books. I'm going to read your book, but you tell me which one you want me to read. And I've done that. And so for me, I can't make a good decision whether it's somebody as controversial as Pete Hegseth or non-controversial as Marco Rubio if I don't look at the entire sheet of music. And part of that will be hearings, FBI, right? Like, I don't even yet have all these pieces together. And I hope all of my colleagues take that same seriousness in our constitutional responsibility. And the reason I think that's important is that's not going against the president. In my view, that's actually helping the president. I tend to view my role as, if you think of a board of directors, who would hire a board of directors and say, I want you to say yes to everything I propose?
A lot of people, actually.
Well, it's not a good way to run a business, though, right? Like, you want your trusted people around you to tell you what they're seeing. And I think it's not only consent, it's advice. Well, I can't give the president advice if I've not thoroughly investigated and understood every moving part to this nominee.
How important, not just with Pete Hegseth, but with nominees generally, how important to you is personal character?
It's huge. I try to live my life. You know, going back to my constituents, I would put that out first and foremost. And so it is a big deal. Now, we're all flawed. And the question is, at what point do you cross that line, right? Because none of us are perfect, and I'm the first to tell you, you know, that I have things in my past that if I were a nominee would be coming up. And so that's the burden, I think, on us, is to decide where that line is.
But if you were to be reviewing a nominee who had, you know, superb professional credentials, a track record of good judgment on policy, but some profound personal character issue, that would still give you pause.
So yes, because you have to balance, like, all of those things that you laid out there could be in degrees, right? As far as degrees of qualifications and degrees of flaws. And that's the burden, is trying to decide where those were. You know, there was a nominee, you all know who I'm referring to, that didn't make it. And I think universally it was felt that that equation was way out of whack, right? It didn't even get off the ground. And I think it was just too easy of a decision, that the gap was too far.
Could you give us any insight into how you're thinking about Tulsi Gabbard as a nominee?
Yeah, so Tulsi is, the biggest problem for me is she's been so low profile. She hasn't, the others have come to my office, and so if you go back to that analogy of a sheet of music, her sheet's pretty blank for me, and I need more information to start filling that in. And look, if I can't fill that in, I can't vote for her, so I've got to find a way of getting that information to make that decision.
And what's your assessment of the notes that are already on the page?
Well, all I have is what's out there in comments. And like I said before, as an elected official, I'm the first to understand, like, you can't really, you got to be careful, like, with what you're hearing about somebody. And so I want to do the research. I will do the research and put the energy in before I cast that vote to make sure I fully understand what the package is.
In the past, you have introduced legislation to limit the president's ability to not any particular president, but limit the presidential power to issue tariffs for national security reasons. I wonder, as you're looking at the way tariffs have been used by President Trump in his first term, by President Biden in his term, looking ahead to the first 100 days of this term, how much are you concerned about the president just having unchecked authority in national security?
Yeah, and let me say, I want to be agnostic to a Republican or Democrat president. And just as a general rule, executive orders are a terrible way to run a country. And we'll see in a very few days a rapid swinging of policy as executive orders are put into place, just as we saw a rapid swinging of policy 4 years ago. Well, that's a terrible way to run a country. And so the problem is when we don't do our job in Congress, it makes it more tempting for the administration to do those things. And I think it's incumbent on us to do our job and take away that temptation from a president.
How do you do that in the trade space?
Well, I've got a bill, it's called the Prove It Act, and it's amazing how simple it is. It's simply asking for a study on carbon intensity, a study. And it's a tiny little swing, and yet it's a heavy lift, right, to get it done. And here again, this is why I think the president often goes to executive orders, because by nature, the way the founders set it up, it's really hard for us to get things done. I think that I wouldn't change that, but it is hard. But at the same time, I'm working on months just to get a simple study done.
Someone who's talked a lot about using executive authority is Elon Musk, right?
Sure.
We're going to transform government, make it more efficient, cut $2 trillion, and we're going to do it heavily using executive authority. How plausible is that to you?
When I became mayor of Provo, I was one of my favorite positions ever was the mayor of Provo, and we need more mayors in Congress, by the way. I inherited a budget that, because of the crisis, the financial crisis back in 2007, I had to cut the budget. And we did so very carefully, but we cut a substantial part of our city budget and increased employee morale and increased quality of services delivered to our residents. And I bring that up because whether it's business or government, there's always waste. There's always, particularly when you go decades without going back and analyzing it. So I welcome the evaluation of that waste, and I welcome the evaluation of programs that are no longer needed. And if we do it correctly, we'll come out the other side with increased morale among federal employees and better services delivered to our constituents. If we do it wrong, we'll destroy morale, we'll destroy the quality of services that we're delivering. And so to the extent I have any influence in that process, I want to make sure that we do it right. And I think, quite frankly, this is one of the things the American people are saying, please go do this, right? Like, people can see that there's waste. People can see the debt is too high. And so I think there's broad consensus something needs to be done, and let's go do it right.
And what does doing it right look like in the context of DOGE?
So I can just tell you, for me, in my experience, is if you come in and say, we're going to cut, let's just say hypothetically, every program of the federal government by 20%, then you cut the good programs, and you don't cut the bad programs as much as you should. So to answer your question, how do you do that right? You have to get into the weeds on everything we do and say, could it be done better? Or should it not be done at all? Right now, I'll give you just a real glaring example. The number of empty office buildings around Washington, D.C. with federal workers not coming to work begs the question, should they be coming into work? And if not, why do we have the buildings? So one of those two needs, does that make sense? One of those two needs an Elon Musk to blow it up, because it's gone for years in the state that it has, and it'll just continue. And that's where the American people can see, oh, something needs to be done.
Do you think Democrats are ready to deal?
So I'm really happy with the tone in Washington, D.C. right now. 8 years ago, it was, as a stereotype, more, we're not going to work with the president. He's not my president. We're going to stop, we're going to do what we can to stop him. That is not the tone right now. The tone right now is there are things the American people expect us to get done, and they're not all partisan. The American people do expect to fix at the border. The American people expect inflation to come down. And I think, I just sense from my Democratic colleagues, many of them want to be part of the solution. That's a good place. I just feel like, look, it's never perfect, right, Republican, Democrat, but like we have the potential to really find some synergy here and do some things that the American people are expecting us to do.
And because it strikes me that in the past couple administrations, there have been meaningful bipartisan accomplishments. They haven't necessarily been on issues that are top of the mind for the average voter, right? Like, say what you will about the CHIPS Act. I don't think that, on Main Street in Provo, there are a lot of people like revved up about semiconductors. Maybe I'm underestimating your constituents. But like on something like inflation, on something like immigration, like what's your optimism level that you can put together something that's going to get like not 51 votes in some cute reconciliation deal, but like, 70 votes, generational accomplishment?
I think if we're talking about border specific and not overall immigration, very, very high. I think if we're talking about bringing peace and stability overseas, very, very high. And if you kind of go back to the campaign and find those issues where I think the American people were just frustrated, I think you'll find a lot of my Democrat colleagues willing to say, let's find a path forward. And I think it's incumbent on both Republicans and Democrats to find those places, agree to disagree on some, like, and if you go to immigration, if you start with, okay, here's the border right here, and here's mass deportation of 20 million people, like somewhere between there, you're not going to agree. That's not hard to see. But what about over here, right? Like, let's go focus on this, and then we'll deal with this later.
And would your advice to President Trump be to keep it closer to that?
Well, he's going to do what he's going to do, right? But I think my advice to Congress, right, to the Senate and to the House would be, like, because that's our job, right? Let's go find those places. Let's work together. I think my biggest frustration is that those in the House and in the Senate who are willing and who like to work together with other people, I tend to call us boring. We don't make the headlines, right? And we've got to find a better way to show the American people that there are more of those than not, and we are getting things done. And when we get things done, doing a better job of bragging about it.
Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Great to be with you. Yes.
Nice socks.
All right, thank you very much for that. I thought I had a hard job turning up in town, and after a week writing a morning newsletter that everybody in Washington's going to read, but the truth is that nobody has a harder job in Washington right now than our next guest. Speaker Mike Johnson, we all know, now has a majority in the House that's very small. He has a president coming into the White House who has a famously tempestuous relationship at times with Republicans in Congress, but that relationship is going to be absolutely critical, as we all know, to the success or otherwise of the latest iteration of the Trump project. So everyone wants to hear what this guy's got to say. Let's get him on stage. Please welcome House Speaker Mike Johnson and our Politico Capitol Bureau Chief and Senior Washington columnist, Rachel Bade, onto the stage. Thank you.
Welcome, Mr. Speaker. Thanks for taking the time.
Glad to be here.
He's a little busy these days. I'm actually going to start there. So you have a quite daunting to-do list this year. You've got to extend Trump-era tax cuts that the CBO says could cost about $5 trillion. You have conservatives who want you to pay for that. You have conservatives who are pushing you to find $2.5 trillion in savings to raise a debt ceiling. You got to pass a border bill, and you already have one member, Thomas Massie, who said yesterday that he will not support H.R. 2. And you also have no room for error in your margin. So just to start off with a little bit of a lighthearted question, how are you sleeping these days?
Well, in the 3 hours that I'm allowed to sleep, I sleep pretty well.
3 hours, is that right?
That's about right. That's about my average lately. There's been a lot going on. A lot of big ticket items that we have to accomplish, clearly. We have a very aggressive agenda. The first 100 days for us is going to be very busy. How do I manage all that? How do I keep it all calm? It really is my worldview. I believe very much in the hand of Providence and that I'm not ultimately in charge. I believe there's a sovereign and he's the one in charge. So we just do our duty. John Quincy Adams said, duty is ours, results are God's. So it's a very liberating way to live. Do your very best every single day, and then you leave the results to somebody higher than you.
Do you have like a routine that sort of keeps you grounded and sane as you're going through all this chaos? And if you don't, you better create one pretty fast, my friend.
No, it's just, look, I genuinely love the colleagues that I work with, every single one of them, even those that get frustrated sometimes. and even with me. And because I really value and appreciate all of their contributions and what they bring to the table, their skill sets, their life experiences, all the rest. So my job every day is to try to leverage that, to let everybody be of their highest and best use to the cause that we all support, and try to keep everybody working together. And it's a big, it's like a big family. And sometimes it's messy in the back room, but at the end of the day, we've got to get the job done, and I'm convinced that we will.
So I want to start with the debt ceiling, because we've seen some breaking news on that over the past 48 hours. You laid out a plan before Christmas to raise the debt ceiling in reconciliation. The whole point of this was to go around Democrats and the leverage that they would have to raise the debt ceiling, which Trump was very worried about specifically. And yet there has been some pushback in the past 48 hours. Majority Leader John Thune told my colleague last night that he has no expectations or plans to put the debt ceiling in instructions for a budget for reconciliation. And then you have some of your own moderates who are pushing back on this, saying you should do it on a bipartisan basis. So is your plan from Christmas, before Christmas, dead on this issue?
Well, it was meant to be a point of discussion. We had to begin somewhere, and this is a thoughtful dialogue that happens between the two chambers and then internally inside each chamber. These are very difficult things to do and very complicated. And so Leader Thune and I talk about this all the time, and he was in my office right before we left for the holiday, and we talked about that very thing. He thought it might be a heavy lift to do it on reconciliation in the Senate. Certainly wouldn't be easy in the House either, but we're looking at all options. I'm not wed to any of them. We've got to do it by consensus. When you have the smallest margin in history, the smallest margin imaginable, which is what we'll have for a big chunk of the first 100 days, you have to build the momentum for everything, and it's got to be member-driven to a certain extent. So this won't be a decision that the Speaker makes in the back office and hoists upon the membership and makes them just, jams it down everyone's throat. It's quite the opposite. It's member-driven, organic, from the bottom up. I mean, I have the vision of where we're going. I know what ultimately we must succeed to do. And many of you heard me talking about over the last year on the campaign trail, our proverbial playbook. I use football metaphors a lot because I'm from Louisiana. Footballs and hurricane metaphors are very useful for us. But we talked about the playbook, and it's well designed, and we have all the plays in the playbook. What we're determining right now is the sequence of the plays. And I have to do that in coordination with the new head coach in that metaphor, which is Donald Trump, and with all my teammates, because everybody's got to know what position they play on the field and how they're going to relate to that. So we're in that process. I mean, it's not, this is not going to be perfect, and the initial ideas are often not the ones that are ultimately adopted, but it is not a threat overall to that agenda. We're going to get it done.
I want to stay on the debt ceiling, though, a little bit longer, because when you came up with this idea to put the debt ceiling on reconciliation, you suggested you would find $2.5 trillion in offsets for conservatives to sort of get on board. And yet you have a lot of members who have never voted for a debt ceiling increase. Did they tell you at the time that if you stick to that promise, $2.5 trillion, that they will vote for this? Or are you finding now that, okay, they're not going to be there, so let's just abandon that strategy?
No, I have two members in particular who've never voted for a debt ceiling and had said it was the red line for them. Both of those members are indicating now, if the conditions are right and if the terms of the legislation are acceptable and there are legitimate cuts to the size and scope of government, which we're all committed to, that they would be open to doing that. So no one has completely foreclosed the possibility. So now the challenge for leadership and for me is to make sure that we fine-tune this. We kind of meet equilibrium across the Republican conference to make sure everyone is satisfied. I will tell you, and I've told all of them as recently as this morning, no one is going to be completely delighted with every provision of a large bill like that. You have to, every single person has to give up on their personal preferences, because we're in a deliberative body and we have 434 colleagues, each of us. But I'm never going to ask any of them to compromise their core principles. So somewhere between those two fixed points on the horizon, so to speak, we're going to find the right combination of things that will get this job done. No one wants to fail. The stakes are too high. The president made very firm commitments on the campaign trail, and we did as well, and we're going to deliver on that America First agenda. We will get it done.
One last debt ceiling question, and then we're going to go to the broader reconciliation bill. I know you want to talk about that, but there's this new idea emerging about pairing the debt ceiling increase with disaster aid for wildfires in California. Yesterday you were asked about this. You said, basically, we'll see. Give us a little more. I mean, what do you think of this? Is this a way to get Democrats to vote for a debt ceiling increase without giving them something else that could be more painful for Republicans?
Well, I just left the leadership press conference, and I was very clear that we don't play politics with disaster aid. I mean, I'm from a disaster-prone state, Louisiana. We have hurricanes and tornadoes and floods all the time. So we're very sympathetic to the people who are really suffering, and it is a huge disaster in LA and Southern California. The concern that a lot of people have is how much is human culpability involved in that? I mean, natural disasters occur, but there are policy decisions that were made in California at the state and local level, by all appearances, that made this exponentially worse. And so those are things that have to be factored in with regard to the level of aid and whether there are conditions upon that, or safeguards, you might say. We have to be good stewards of the public fisc. So it's a brand new situation. It is a brand new idea to combine that in some way with the funding decisions we have to make. We're far away from a decision on it, but it is something that's being discussed, not for political purposes, but so that we can properly balance the interests of the American people and our financial condition right now. So.
Yeah, and it's interesting you bring this up, because there are some Republicans who are pushing back already. People like Tom Tillis, North Carolina, obviously had the hurricane disaster there. Rick Scott of Florida, who has seen a lot of this disaster aid help his state there too. Let's move on to the bigger reconciliation package. President Trump has said he wants one big, beautiful bill. Sounds like he reiterated that to you this morning in a phone call. Is that right?
That's his stated his preference. And the reason for that is because he wants to ensure that we just get the job done. He says that all the time. President Trump, as you know, is a visionary, a big picture guy. He's not so much caught up in the details of the procedural stuff that we all wrestle with. He just wants to make sure we check those boxes, and I do as well. He has seen the one big package as the highest probability of success, and I have as well, and that's why we've been sort of settled on that.
And yet, despite him endorsing this sort of bill with tax, border, energy, all the things, Senator Lindsey Graham, budget chair, says, he indicated last week that he was going to forge ahead as planned, writing instructions for a budget that is more narrow, specifically, border and defense focused. And as you know, you can't have reconciliation at all if the Senate and the House are passing different budgets. So what are you going to do about this? I mean, you and Thune have talked. You're still on different pages.
We'll get on the same page. I mean, Lindsey Graham is a good friend, as is Ted Cruz, who's been a big advocate of the two-bill strategy in the Senate. They have very different factors to consider than we do in the House. As I remind them, I have more than 150 more personalities to deal with. We have much more diverse caucus in the House than they do in the Senate. For example, on the SALT issue, which you all know for people, my colleagues from New Jersey and New York and California, it's one of their biggest priorities. It's not even a thought really in the Senate because Republican senators come from red states and SALT is just not a thing for them. So I have a much more complex decision matrix than the Senate has. And sometimes I feel like that may be underappreciated by some of our colleagues in the other chamber, but at the end of the day, we intend for the House to be the leader on this because that's the way it's designed to work. And we're working on a feverish, very aggressive calendar to get that job done, send it to the Senate, and have us working together. So all the palace intrigue about the supposed division between the chambers and the personalities, it's not. People are having very thoughtful discussions about what is the best path forward. And Lindsey and Ted and my other colleagues and friends who have favored a two-bill solution they say that in good faith. The idea is that you put points on the board, back to my football metaphor, put points on the board early in the first quarter so that you have momentum as you go through the game. But there's a risk to doing that. If it diminishes the probability of success in the end, and if there's a prospect that you might lose the actual game, and this is the national championship, then if you forego putting points on the board early, if that's the game strategy, it makes sense. So we're working through all that. We'll get it done.
Well, that's why I asked, because it's not just a palace intrigue story. It really does impact the agenda. And I mean, you have laid out a timeline this morning in conference wanting to have final passage of both budgets by the end of February. But it sounds like you guys are going to write your own budget. The Senate's going to write their own budget. I don't see, when I'm looking at your schedule here, a week for negotiation with the Senate to come up with a plan. Are you guys just going to do your own thing until the last second and then make a decision?
It may not surprise you, there's a more detailed calendar than the one you got this morning.
Ouch!
No, it's not personal. No, As I laid out to my colleagues this morning, I had a big slide with lots of numbers and small font on it. But there is a week at the end where if there is a difference between the Senate and the House, then we will reconcile those two. And look, I sent a long text message yesterday morning to Lindsey Graham and Ted Cruz, who are both good friends of mine, and said, look, these are the factors and the things that we're dealing with in the House. Let's have a thoughtful discussion about that.
Did they respond?
I haven't even checked. I've been so busy, Rachel, I don't even know.
Oh, that's right. I heard in conference one time recently, you told your members you had more than 100 text messages on your phone from them that you hadn't responded to.
This morning, because I have to apologize to my colleagues all the time because they get, people think that I'm ignoring them. And this morning, on my phone right now, 2 hours ago, it was 387 text messages I'm behind. And that's my new phone number. So it's a bit of a problem. And I have just great staff, and they're trying to help me manage all the incoming, but it's an ongoing problem. So if I don't respond to your text soon, it's not because I don't like you. I'm sorry.
This actually I wasn't going to bring this up in this interview, but I've heard from other senior Republicans that you, in particular, have a hard time with delegating, that you like to be having conversations with members yourself. You're not going to rely on another member to talk to another member to talk to another member about how to vote or how to get them to support things. Do you really think that you're going to be able to do this, given all the things you have to do, all the members you have to talk to? Or is that necessary for keeping close to these members when you have no margin of error?
Yeah, some of this is by necessity. I mean, I would like to delegate a lot more, but the way the modern speakership has evolved, and especially in a time when you have the smallest margins in history, sometimes I've learned the hard way that if you delegate too much, it creates even more problems and more that you have to go unwind and do. So I'm trying to be as directly involved as I can, as much as I'm able to. That's why I only get 3 hours of sleep a night, because that's really important. The relationship part of this is very important. In the old days, I mean, Newt Gingrich has done a couple of op-eds the last several months and said, poor Speaker Johnson has the most challenging speakership since the Civil War. And it's because of the margin, it's because of social media, because of all the new factors that we deal with right now that previous generations didn't. But the speaker right now has to have a direct relationship of trust with every single member, because I do not have the luxury of telling 20 people to go pound sand. I mean, it's not how this works. I gotta have every single person. So sometimes it's important for them to have a direct conversation with the speaker. That said, we have delegated a huge amount of this. We have listening sessions. The whip, Tom Emmer's doing an extraordinary job hosting a lot of the listening sessions with a broad cross-section of members. Leader Scalise is holding listening sessions in his conference room. I'm doing it myself. We're all combining all that together, and at the end of the day, it'll come together seamlessly. Just watch and wait.
You want to come back in 100 days? We're having another event. We're going to give you a grade.
I'm going to be busy, Rachel.
We're going to give you a grade on how you've done on the first 100 days. I want to go back to Thune, because last time I interviewed you, we talked a lot about your relationship with President Trump. I don't know a lot about your relationship with Thune. I mean, is this like very quickly you're doing a lot of speed dating with him as you're trying to pass an agenda? Tell us a little bit about your relationship, because you guys have been on a collision course on a couple of things so far.
No, it's not a collision. I have a very high opinion of Leader Thune. I think he's a great man, great individual. He's principled. He has a lot of experience. He's been on the Hill for, over 28 years, I think. And he came from the House, so he knows the reality that I've got to deal with. He had a very different environment back then than I do now, but he appreciates that, and I'm grateful that he does. We were acquaintances prior to both of us being elevated, him being elevated to this position, and I've had a delightful time getting to know him much better over the last several weeks. He and our wives together have had dinner, and so we've had a little, private time as well. He's an honest broker, and he has great reverence for the institution, and he's operating in good faith all the time. And I think that what we appreciate about one another, he knows that what I tell him is going to be the truth and vice versa, and that's a really critical thing. It has always been surprising to me that the two chambers did not coordinate better. I mean, it's an elemental, fundamental thing to me that Republicans in the Senate and the House should be coordinating, because, especially in a moment of unified government, that's really important. So I think he understands that as well, and we've been in constant contact and communication, and it's gone very well.
I do have to ask about your relationship with Donald Trump, too, since we're talking about those. You have proved pretty deft in navigating landmines that I would say might blow up some other relationships with Donald Trump. You passed Ukraine aid when MAGA was sort of against it. You did not shut the government down over the SAVE Act or over the debt ceiling right before Christmas, even though President Trump was obviously very interested in that. You've convinced him to do one reconciliation bill after Thune had seemingly convinced him to do two. You got him to change his mind. What is your secret?
It's trust. It's the same thing that is the basis of all these relationships. I mean, when I tell the president something, he knows that I'm operating in good faith. He doesn't agree with my assessment all the time, but we have thoughtful discussion about that. And this relationship has developed over 8 years because I came to Washington as a new freshman in Congress the same time he came to Washington in 2017, and it was new to both of us. And I was a backbench junior member of Congress at the time, but I got through a series of circumstances, I got in pretty close to the orbit, and I was telling him things that I really thought that he should hear. And I think he's come to value that, and he knows that when I tell him something, I have no agenda other than what's best for the country and what's best for him, because if he's successful as president, then it's great for the country. And so I've really gotten to enjoy it. We've become good friends and in a great working relationship. We talk almost constantly. I think that's really important, and I give him credit for being a fully engaged president. It is not the norm to have a president who's so deeply and personally engaged with members, and especially the leadership. And I think it's going to be very important for the country going forward.
You know, Kevin McCarthy famously buttered up Trump with pink and red starbursts, which were Trump's favorite candy. You don't have something like this.
I don't butter anybody up, and I don't make backroom deals. I mean, look, I'm very transparent, and maybe that's not the best thing to do in Washington, but at the end of the day, right now, it turns out to be really important. I'm not going to take an individual or a subset of members into a room and make a deal with them that I wouldn't put on the front page of the newspaper. I don't do that, and so it's upset some people along the way, because that's, Washington is supposed to be about deal making, but it's the only way to do this job right now. You have to be a completely transparent and honest broker among your colleagues, or because if you have a breach of that trust, then the whole thing collapses. So that's how I deal with everybody from the president on down.
Last Trump relationship question. After the CR fight, I reported, and it was my understanding that, Trump, obviously he was angry he didn't get his debt ceiling increase, right? And he was sort of thinking, do I want Johnson as Speaker again? Yet, you fast forward a week later, he not only endorses you again, he leans in, helps you get the gavel. We just had Steve Bannon, not exactly your biggest fan, on a panel a few hours ago, and he admitted he's not a big fan of yours, but he said Trump trusts you. I guess I'm wondering what happened between, mid-December to that speakership vote.
Well, look, when you have a relationship of trust, I mean, I'm honored and humbled to have the president's, full endorsement, and that's been key to the success of all this. But when you have a relationship of trust, you can have disagreements about issues or play calls or legislation, but it doesn't disrupt that relationship, and that's what's so important. That's the common thread that goes through it. I don't agree with my wife 100% of the time. I mean, do you agree with your spouse 100% of the time? No, but
she's always right, though.
She's always right, always right, for the record. And we have, as we say in the Deep South, intense fellowship sometimes. But at the end of the day, it works out because, we have that great relationship that undergirds it. So the same thing with the president. I mean, we can disagree about particular decisions at the time, but it doesn't change our relationship.
So while reconciliation is sort of being ironed out, the budget, what's going to be in it, et cetera, you've laid out a slew of Republican bills that are going to be passed in the next few weeks, sort of a roadmap of your priorities. What is the message you guys are trying to send with these bills? You got the Lincoln Riley bill that cracks down on undocumented immigrants who committed crimes, protection of women and girls in sports this week, Violence Against Women by Illegal Aliens Act, no bailouts for sanctuary cities. What are you trying to tell the country?
And energy policy and some other big priorities. What we're trying to tell the country is that the common theme here is common sense. I mean, we're trying to restore common sense. Not having men compete in women's sports is about, 80, 90% issue across the country because it follows common sense. Deporting violent, illegal aliens who are committing crimes on women and children is common sense. We should have done this already. We did. These bills all passed with Republican votes in the last Congress, but they died a slow death on Chuck Schumer's desk. Now we have unified government. So our intention is to pass that again and to see how many Democrats come along. I was heartened to see a number of Democrats join us on the Lincoln Riley Act last week, and we'll see this week how they do on women's sports. We're not doing this for political purposes. We're doing it to deliver on the promises we made to the American people and to restore common sense in Washington, because that is the demand. That is what America First policies and agenda are all about, and we're going to continue to do that throughout the Congress.
Last question for you. You just announced this morning that Virginia Fox is going to be your rules chair, who, by the way, she is terrifying. If
Yes.
you're a reporter
That's why she's a
in the
great
member-only elevator, she will yell at you. She's terrifying. But I'm actually more interested in what you're going to do with the other three conservatives on the panel. Tom Massey, Chip Roy, Ralph Norman, all have been a pain in your side. Are you going to take them off the committee?
No, I'll tell you what happened. We announced it about an hour ago. So Thomas Massey called me a couple of months back and said he wanted to rotate off of the Rules Committee. It's a lot of extra work, and he does a lot of other things. He wanted to put his focus elsewhere, and I said, that makes sense, Thomas.
Lucky
Thanks.
for you.
Lucky for you. No, I mean, he made the decision really himself, and so I didn't have to address that. Chip Roy will be back on the Rules Committee, as will Ralph Norman, because they contribute well there. And we're going to replace the Massey seat with Morgan Griffith, who is a very thoughtful person and almost a total nerd about rules. I mean, he is just one of those guys that studies it and loves it. It's kind of an obvious fit. And Virginia Fox would be a great chair. She used to be the vice chair of rules. She did a couple of cycles there, and then she rotated off to take the gavel of education and workforce. And now she's going to come back and do that duty again. She's well suited. She's the most senior female in our Republican conference, and she is terrifying. She's about 4'8" she's a spark plug, and nobody messes with her, which will make her a great chair.
Well, on that note, we'll leave it there. Good luck to you this year, and we want you to come back in 100 days, and we're going to talk about how you did. We'll see if you get these things passed, or if it ends up like Obamacare repeal and goes nowhere.
No, we're not doing that. We're not doing that. No. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker,
Appreciate
thank
it.
you. Yep.
Thanks a lot.
Hello. Speaker Johnson sounds much more optimistic than a lot of folks about how these things are going to turn out in that first 100 days. We'll have to see how that ends up shaking up. One of the ways in which we'll find out how that's going to shake out is how Democrats are going to enact. He's going to need some Democratic votes for a lot of these things they're talking about. One of those Democrats we have here today, Democratic Congressman Jamie Raskin, who is going to be interviewed by our senior staff writer and columnist, Ankush Kadore.
Congressman Raskin, it's such a pleasure to be with you. I think we have a lot of things to discuss that kind of fall right within your wheelhouse. But before we kind of get into the latest sort of Justice Department news, Judiciary Committee-related news, I want to take a moment to just talk about Joe Biden. Obviously, he's leaving office in less than a week.
Yes.
You know, his campaign in 2020 posited that his election might be a way to turn the page on the Trump years and to sort of reinvigorate American democracy in a way that he envisioned. Trump is now coming back, so that project seems to have failed. What do you make of Biden's legacy under the circumstances?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me, and it's appropriate to be talking about Joe Biden here at Union Station, Mr. Amtrak himself, you know. But I barely recognize Union Station. This is pretty amazing the way you guys have done it up here. Look, Biden did put those Trump years behind us, and he beat Donald Trump by more than 7 million votes, 306 to 232 in the Electoral College, and we should never forget that. I know that Donald Trump beat Kamala Harris by 3 million votes in this last election, but I think we need to keep some perspective about where America is, and you know, it's one of the great things about democracy that we have these pendulum swings and turns, and of course, anybody who was an incumbent during the post-COVID-19 inflationary period went down all over the world, left, right, and center, and so we can't forget that historical context. But I think that he was a great president who ranks right up there with some of the best from the 20th century, like Lyndon Johnson, like Franklin Roosevelt. We did massive infrastructure investment. I sat there for 4 years under Donald Trump. We had infrastructure week, we had infrastructure month, we had infrastructure barbecue. We just never had an infrastructure bill. And Joe Biden sent it to us his first week in office. We passed it in the first month, a $1.2 trillion investment in the roads, the highways, the bridges, the ports, the airports, rail, trails, cybersecurity, rural broadband, you name it. And that, to me, really set the tempo for an administration that had huge breakthroughs, like with the Chips and Science Act and the semiconductor industry, the Inflation Reduction Act, which was not only the most massive investment in climate action in world history, but also dramatically reduced prescription drug prices in the country. I concede it had a terrible name because it didn't begin to capture everything that was going on. But look, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris oversaw huge growth in the economy, more than 16 million new jobs created, the lowest unemployment in the last 50 years in our history. And so I would rank him up there with the best of the 20th century and some of the best of the 19th century in terms of his articulation of democratic ideals and constitutional values. I think you could fault him for not fully wrestling with the politics of the 21st century, which has grown so fragmented and decentralized through the internet and the breakup of the old communications and media systems. And I think that's where he had problems. But the historians are going to treat him and his administration very kindly.
Let's talk about some legal issues, some Justice Department related issues. Obviously, last night we got some major news in the form of the release of Special Counsel Jack Smith's report into the investigation and prosecution of Donald Trump concerning the 2020 election. You have not had an opportunity to read that report in full. I think very few people have. I imagine you'll be reading it in the days ahead, as many of us will be. What are you going to be looking for in that document? What it's going to sort of pique your interest?
Well, I think if you add together the three major investigative reports, you have a comprehensive documentary and narrative record as to what happened with respect to January 6th and the effort to overthrow the 2020 presidential election. The first wave was the impeachment trial of Donald Trump in the Senate, and I was the leader of the House managers as we went over there, and we definitively proved that Donald Trump had incited the insurrection against the Union, and we had robust bipartisan, bicameral majorities validating that. Then we had the January 6th committee, which gave a completely comprehensive and exhaustive recitation of all of the events leading up to the attack on the Capitol, the effort to get the vice president to step outside of his constitutional role to declare and then exercise unwritten vice presidential powers to nullify electoral college votes and then to kick the whole election into the House of Representatives, where we would be voting as they knew, not on the basis of one member, one vote, but one state, one vote under the 12th Amendment. And the violent assault surrounding that attempted coup. So that was all laid out in painstaking detail by the bipartisan January 6th committee, and nobody has laid a glove on a single factual detail in that more than 800-page report that was based on interviews and testimony by hundreds of witnesses, and most of the key witnesses came from the Trump administration themselves. People like Cassidy Hutchinson, who at great personal risk to herself came forward and told the truth about what had happened, and nobody's laid a glove on that. So I started to look at the report by Jack Smith last night, and I saw, again, him corroborating the findings of these prior investigations, but also laying out a very compelling case, certainly probable cause, and I think that they would have been able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, but who knows, it was all nullified. But in any event, laying out the legal case for why there was an actual conspiracy to interfere with people's voting rights, to usurp the election away from the people and the Electoral College, and to interfere with the joint session of Congress in the peaceful transfer of power. It's all right there. And nobody has successfully contested a single detail, much less advanced a counter-narrative. I know some of my colleagues sometimes talk about Antifa or Hamas or FBI agents on their way down to the DC jail, where they go and protest for the release of all of these Antifa fighters. Of course, they knew they weren't Antifa fighters, as Kevin McCarthy told Donald Trump on January 6th itself when they were on the phone, "These are your people, Mr. President," called them off. And of course, that prompted the response from Donald Trump, well, maybe they're just a little more interested in a fair election than you are, thereby conceding, of course, that these were his people, that he had incited with the words, "You got to go and fight like hell, and if you don't, we're not going to have a country anymore." So look, we're a democracy. The government belongs to the people, and we've got to deal with the facts. James Madison was very clear about that. We got to deal with the truth. So you can make arguments for Donald Trump or Kamala Harris or whomever you want, but you should make them based on facts, not based on conspiracy theories and lies.
Obviously, you know, the Smith report brings to a conclusion a remarkable and unprecedented prosecutorial endeavor in this country. And you know, your constituent, Attorney General Merrick Garland, obviously has played a very integral role in that project. I want to read a couple of quotes from the last couple of weeks in some of the news coverage concerning the prosecution and its conclusion. Representative Gerald Nadler, who you're obviously taking the place of, recently told Huffington Post, quote, "Merrick Garland wasted a year in initiating the investigation and eventual prosecution of Donald Trump. An anonymous Justice Department official involved in the early portion of the investigation recently told CNN, quote, "They wasted time, they were not strategic, it was a whole year of nothing. They waited so long, they ended up helping Trump in the primary and dividing the country." What do you think?
But on that time question?
Yeah.
Well, obviously, I mean, looking at it in hindsight, the prosecutors ran out of time. So it seems hard to argue with the proposition that it all should have begun earlier, which isn't to say it necessarily would have won, because they were trying to run out the clock no matter what. And if you're dealing with a completely partisan judge like Eileen Cannon, she would have done anything in her power to make sure that the clock was run out. So who knows what the difference would have been, but undoubtedly, I'm sure a lot of people feel they should have started earlier.
Well, yeah. Well, the DC case obviously is pending here in front of a different judge. The classified documents case was handled with Judge Cannon. Given all of this, obviously you have devoted years of your life to understanding what happened after the 2020 election and what led to January 6th, and obviously worked on the committee. What do you make of the legacy of that committee? I mean, is it challenging for you now to go back? I mean, on some level, do you think it was all worthless or pointless?
Oh, on the contrary. I think that it was invaluable and historically will be a landmark moment where on a bipartisan basis we had a congressional committee that was devoted to one task, and we conducted and lived our oaths of office to stand up for the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and we were not going to allow a political hatchet job to take place. We were not going to allow the truth to be swept under the rug, and we didn't. And again, you know, anybody who's got any particular factual contradictions of points in the January 6th report should come forward, because nobody has.
It is quite remarkable, actually, as Trump has continuously over the last couple of years said it's all lies, it's all made up, it's a fraud. He has never contested a single material allegation from the committee's work or from the January 6th case that Smith brought. I want to transition to the Judiciary Committee now.
Yes.
You're going to be taking on a new role as ranking member, so congratulations on that.
I appreciate it.
With Democrats in the minority, you're going to have maybe a bullhorn, but not, you know, some institutional power. When Trump does something that crosses some sort of line in your view, maybe it's firing someone, maybe it's prosecuting someone, what sorts of tools do you think you're going to have at your disposal to try to push back?
Well, they have the narrowest of majorities, which of course undercuts the fraudulent claim that it was some kind of landslide election. It started 220 to 215. It's down to 219 to 215, I believe. And then after Lee Stefanik goes and Michael Waltz, it'll be 217 to 215, which if you do the math, you will figure out they cannot afford to lose a single vote. And you're talking about a coalition that is already beginning to fly apart between the billionaire oligarchs like Elon Musk, who love cheap foreign labor. They want to expand the H-1B program. Then you've got Steve Bannon and the nativist majority within MAGA who want to cut off all immigration to the country. You've got some people like my friend Speaker Johnson, who was just up here, who sponsored the Life Begins at Conception Act, who have been advancing the idea of banning abortion nationally, which was, of course, enabled by the Supreme Court's decision overruling Roe versus Wade. And then you have others, and I would maybe include Donald Trump in this, who don't really care about abortion and are doing everything they can to run away from the issue, even though he was bragging about having appointed the justices who did overturn a woman's right to choose. So I think that they have the slenderest of majorities, and on any particular issue, huge divisions and fissures going on with their coalition, and we're going to do whatever we can to work with people. I mean, Jim Jordan is my counterpart on judiciary. We sponsored legislation together called the Press Act that I'm very proud of. I hope he's still proud of it, which protects the right of reporters not to have compulsory production of their confidential sources and their notes and documents. That passed unanimously in the Judiciary Committee. It passed unanimously in the House, and unfortunately, after Trump tweeted against it, it was held up by 1 or 2 senators in the Senate. But I hope we could continue to push that through in the interest of protecting freedom of the press. You guys are not the enemies of the people, as you've been called. You are the people's best friend. When you're doing your job right, you are the people's best friend.
What do you expect Jordan's focus is going to be, though? Right? I mean, he is coming in and he has endorsed Trump's claims that basically he's been. The Justice Department has been, quote unquote, weaponized against him, that the investigators are corrupt somehow, that the prosecutors in New York and Fulton County. I mean, he seems primed to potentially use his perch as the chair of the Judiciary Committee to try to probe some of these things.
I mean, I feel like the American people are exhausted and sick of all of the right-wing conspiracy theories and the nonsense, and there is no public appetite for prosecuting the prosecutors, investigating the investigators, and so on. If they think that they have some substantive different analysis of what took place on January 6th, come forward and tell America what it is. But otherwise, these are just ludicrous fishing expeditions. We just went through one of those for the last 2 years when I was the ranking member on the Oversight Committee, and we had to completely demolish and humiliate the absurd case made by Chairman Comer and the Republicans for impeachment of Joe Biden for high crimes and misdemeanors, which remain still unknown and unspecified. We don't even know what they are, and some of the Republicans are saying, let's keep it going. If you look at the Weiss report, which was released this week, that was a Republican U.S. attorney who was named to his position by William Barr, and they came forward with all of this stuff about Hunter Biden, about the tax charges and the gun charges that took place, and nothing about Joe Biden. It just further underscores that all of that was nonsense. And it did come down to the word of Alexander Smirnov, who was a Russian intelligence asset who lied about Ukrainian payments to Joe Biden and Hunter Biden. Like, that is established now. Alexander Smirnov was convicted in court of trying to, give these lies to the FBI. So that should be definitive proof to put it to rest. But in lieu of any real program that unifies their party, much less the Congress, much less the country, they want to go back to these right-wing conspiracy theory fishing expeditions. It's just outlandish and madcap.
This week, your counterparts in the Senate on the Judiciary Committee are going to be hearing from Pam Bondi at her confirmation hearings. I believe they're scheduled for 2 days. What should Senate Democrats be asking her?
Well, I haven't done a full study of her career and her positions, but I know that she and Kash Patel both bought into the big lie about the 2020 election. They both bought into the completely fraudulent concept that Donald Trump had beaten Joe Biden when Joe Biden beat Donald Trump by more than 7 million votes, 306 to 232 in the Electoral College, and there were more than 60 federal and state court decisions repudiating every claim of electoral fraud and corruption that they had advanced in court. And 8 or 9 of those judges were appointed by Donald Trump himself. So we have this definitive, absolute legal record refuting their big lie, and yet they want to appoint as the Attorney General of the United States and the FBI director people who embrace the big lie and then embrace all of the lies to follow, including the lies about January 6th.
That is like a very big dividing line, obviously, for someone like you. you're going to have to deal very closely with them if they're confirmed to their positions as Attorney General and FBI Director. Are you concerned that that is going to be difficult?
Sure. I mean, leave aside just January 6th itself and the fact that our democracy came very close to being overthrown. But their whole approach to the law and to facts is deeply, profoundly troubling. I mean, do we want people in charge of the FBI and the Department of Justice who can't tell truth from fiction, who can't read 60 federal and state court decisions to see that the pieties that they're mouthing are completely fraudulent? And that's a real problem for the whole country. And I would hope that America wants to stand up for the rule of law and the truth. There's no democracy without truth. And you can see that very simply just from an election, because somebody wins an election and somebody loses an election. You don't always get your way. For example, the Democrats, we just went on January 6th to the joint session of Congress, and we engaged in the peaceful transfer of power. We were constitutional patriots. Our candidate didn't win, but we accepted that. Remember when America used to do that? Well, in 2020, they took us off in a different direction because they said, we're going to allow our political desires to dictate our sense of reality and facts and truth. How dangerous is that for a democratic society? Our Constitution was created by Enlightenment liberals, people who wanted to get away from the rule of dogma and what we would call today propaganda and disinformation. And yet we now have political forces in society who want to be run completely by dogma and completely by propaganda, whether we're talking about COVID-19 or who won an election or, is the evolution part of science or not?
For the last couple of years, obviously, Donald Trump has been threatening retaliatory prosecutions if he's reelected, which he has been. He did this through the campaign. He tweeted about it. He's at some point sent some mixed signals about this, but it has been a consistent through line for years now. How concerned are you that Bondi and Patel will actually pursue a campaign of retaliatory prosecutions?
Well, we don't have kings and queens here. Our Constitution was written by American revolutionaries who rebelled against monarchy and the idea that the people who get into power can just prosecute their political foes, even if they haven't done anything wrong. So I know there have been a whole bunch of threats made, especially against Benny Thompson, the chair of the January 6th committee, the vice chair, Liz Cheney, the members of the committee, January 6th prosecutors who've prosecuted hundreds of people, who wounded, injured, and hospitalized more than 140 of our police officers on January 6th, smashing them with Confederate battle flags and Trump flags and spearing them, causing heart attacks, strokes, broken jaws, you name it. So yeah, I know that they're talking about prosecuting the people who responded to this outrageous assault on our democracy. And all I can say is I will stand up for the Constitution and what the founders did. They gave everybody the First Amendment, the freedom of speech, the right to petition government for redress of grievances, the freedom of the press. They also gave those of us who are in Congress the protections of the speech and debate clause, that we can't be arrested and prosecuted for doing our jobs as legislators. Solidarity is going to be the watchword moving into this new period. I'm going to stand up for anybody who suffers political prosecution, persecution, retaliation, or death threats, and those kinds of things, which of course have been legion ever since this nightmare began.
So, I mean, it sounds like you're prepared to contemplate that this might be something you need to deal with, sort of retaliatory prosecutions in a second Trump administration. Obviously, there's been quite a bit of talk recently about whether Biden should issue some preemptive pardons on his way out of the office, particularly as it relates to members of the January 6th committee. Some people, like Adam Kinzinger, have said that they don't want one. Would you like a pardon?
Well, we don't need a pardon in any just world because we haven't committed any crimes and we haven't done anything wrong. We've just done our jobs. And so, the speech and debate clause protects us against federal criminal prosecution, state criminal prosecution, and also against civil lawsuits that would try to attack us simply for doing our jobs and fulfilling our legislative functions. So, I know different people have different feelings about the whole pardon thing, because there are these outrageous threats that are being leveled against people just for doing their jobs, like January 6th prosecutors at the Department of Justice. And so I don't know what the right answer to that is. And, I'm glad we've got a wise president with wise people around him who will be able to figure that out.
Obviously, a lot of the focus has been on members of the January 6th with respect to the retaliatory prosecution and the pardons, questions in the press, interviews in the press. Are there people outside of that universe?
Sure.
Because those are pretty prominent people, right? And let's be honest, they're going to be able to use resources at their disposal, money, access, to defend themselves if it comes to that, people like you. But what about the lesser known people? I mean, are there people out there that you are legitimately concerned about?
The speech and debate clause the courts have found applies to staff, but obviously staff could come within the scopes of any retaliatory fury that's unleashed on the public. There are also the witnesses. I mean, I worry most about people like Cassidy Hutchinson. Michael Cohen, who was Donald Trump's lawyer, who came forward to tell the truth about the crimes that were created by the hush money payoff scheme with Stormy Daniels. Lev Parnas was Rudy Giuliani's right-hand man, who came forward and tell the truth and say, there was nothing there. We were trying to concoct stories about Joe Biden. He's somebody who could be threatened. So I think people in that category need our assistance and our solidarity. And I would hope that there's some things that could bring us together where we can work on together on a bipartisan way. For example, I know that President-elect Trump seems to be very proud of the fact that he won in the popular vote this time. He didn't win in the popular vote in 2016, but he won by more than 3 million votes. I know Joe Biden was proud that he won by more than 7 million votes in 2020. Well, how about we get everybody together and say it's time for us to start electing the President of the United States the way we elect representatives, senators, governors, mayors, everybody else. Whoever gets the most votes wins. Let's use this as an opportunity to get beyond all of the problems with the Electoral College, which is an accident waiting to happen every 4 years. That's something that we could do. Another thing we could do is to ban stock trading by members of Congress. The floor of the Senate and the floor of the House should not be like the New York Stock Exchange. I would hope that's something we could get together on. There's real progress we can make if we're willing to talk to each other and we're not just drowning in recrimination and retaliation for the last set of conflicts.
I think that's a great note for us to conclude on. So thank you so much for joining us and speaking with me.
Thanks for having me.
Hi. All right, thank you very much for that. We are approaching the end of this. We've got one more panel for you all before we leave. I just want to say thank you again all so much for coming. I did hear a rumor that there are a few people in the room that haven't signed up for Playbook. If that's true, please do it now. My first one's on Monday morning, so you need to have done it by then if you're going to keep me sweet. The last thing we're going to do here is a panel with the reporters you've seen today from Politico to reflect on what we've heard today and have a little discussion about the most interesting news lines that have come out of it. We've got a few people to welcome onto the stage who you've heard from already this morning, and they're going to sit on a bunch of chairs here, I think, and we'll just talk through the day. But it's very pleasing to me to welcome them back onto the stage. Are we going to get some more chairs for them on here? Not yet? Okay. It sounds like they're not sure they're going to do that. No, they're saying let's leave that and let's just intro Goli. That's a much better idea. Okay, fine. Sorry, reporters, you're not up to it. I'm going to introduce then our chief executive to wrap this up. Goli, thank you. Oh no, here they are. Look, they're going to strut the stage. This is kind of like a fashion walk. And as ever, Eugene always wins. Okay, fair enough.
It's true.
Okay, so are we doing this? Are we doing this round table?
Why not?
Yeah.
Why not?
Let's chat a little bit with the people who are dedicated readers of Playbook.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, I wanted to ask Rachel. I mean, you were with Speaker Johnson on the stage for quite a while. He said he's going to get this thing done, but he didn't really tell us how he's going to get it done. Are you convinced? Is this going to happen?
I do think it will happen because of the consequences if they don't. Trump is just going there's going to be pressure enough for them to get there eventually. Oh,
There we
okay,
go.
there's my mic. My short answer, in case you didn't hear, was yes, that they're going to get it done. I think the thing that was most interesting about the interview with Johnson was how he just didn't have an answer about how they're going to pass a budget. And obviously, they have to pass the same budget in the House and Senate. They have to have the same plan in order to advance anything. And right now, you know, Trump has weighed in, and the Senate is frankly kind of ignoring him right now. And I was trying to get Johnson to like open up about like, what are you gonna do? Like the Senate is ignoring Trump about one big, beautiful bill. They don't wanna do the debt ceiling and reconciliation, which was part of a deal Johnson had struck with conservatives before Christmas. And he didn't quite have an answer for it. But right now they're on two totally different paths. They're on a collision course, the Senate and the House. And I'm just like, it feels like they're gonna waste a lot of time until they get on the same page. And that's what I'm gonna be watching closely, obviously.
Alex, you've covered many different formations of Congress and President. You've seen many clashes between them. Does this feel different? I mean, they're supposed to all be united, right? These guys are on the same page, and yet it doesn't feel like that today.
You know, it's funny because on the one hand, it does feel different because of President Trump's just incredibly commanding sort of stature in the Republican coalition. On the other hand, the experience of a new party wins power, they feel very good about it, but it's actually quite a small majority, all things considered, on the Hill. They have a lot that they want to get done in one reconciliation bill or maybe two reconciliation bills, and what's the sequencing of things going to be? Are there places where we can work with the other party? Like, this does feel a little 2021 first year of Joe Biden, right? That like, will we do the climate investments before infrastructure? Will we do them all together? Will we do infrastructure first? Like, surely we can all figure this out. And they did, but at like a catastrophic political price for themselves, right? So I agree with Rachel that all the incentives are in the direction of eventually getting something done, but the distance between here and eventually is can be quite a painful one.
And by the way, the most fun you'll have as a reporter is covering when one party controls everything and they're actually trying to pass things. Like early 2021 when they were trying to do Build Back Better, so fun to cover the Dems. And then, you know, beginning of 2017 when Republicans were trying to pass the Obamacare repeal, like obviously that failed, but my gosh, the dynamics here in Washington are gonna be so interesting over the next 6 months. Our job is gonna be so fascinating.
Well, the inter-party stuff is much more interesting than, you know what the Democrats are gonna say about the Republicans, but what Republicans say about each other is much more fascinating and unpredictable.
Where does it all leave the Democrats, Eugene? They're a party licking their wounds at the moment. Is there some way back for them instantly, or do they just watch this play out and sort of point and laugh?
I think they're limping. They're limping back, right? You have this party that has not figured out what it's like to be the opposition, right? They're trying to figure out, with these hearings, for example, how far do they want to go in opposing these Trump nominees that he has for his cabinet? So that's one. Two, with the House, you have folks on the left who are saying, we shouldn't help Johnson pass anything. When he comes to us asking for our votes on anything, we say no because we don't want to help them look like they're governing. But then you have someone like, you know, Hakeem Jeffries who stays out of it quite a bit, right, leading them. So those fights are going to be interesting too. Writ large, the party still doesn't know what's going on. We're hosting the DNC forum. Dasha and I are heading down tomorrow. And some of our other colleagues. Tune in live, Politico.com, it will be there, or come to Detroit. But who's gonna be the chair of that party, it might be more interesting to see who's gonna lead the Democratic National Committee than it has been in the past, because the leadership underneath that, the folks that are elected, are not on the same page. And so someone like Ken Martin or Ben Wickler or Marianne Williamson, whoever ends up winning this, could end up having more power and influence than they have in that position before.
Dasha, we're bringing it back to the first 100 days. We've got Trump in the White House come Monday, and we heard from Steve Bannon this morning that there's going to be days of thunder.
Days of thunder.
To follow
it's
that.
not shock and awe anymore. Now it's days of thunder.
Days of thunder. Tom Cruise reference, I think. But anyway, probably too young to know. From your point of view, or from our point of view, given the current status in Congress, this is going to look like executive action, right? And what can we expect in the first days from Trump next week, do you think?
I mean, from everything I've been hearing, it's drill, baby, drill, it's immigration, and it's the economy. Now, what that looks like on paper versus the execution, I think that's going to be the big question mark, especially as we talk about, like, look, what is the future for the Democratic Party? I think for the Republicans, you have this ideologically diverse coalition that has never existed really in the party like this before, which is what gives Trump this mandate that he feels he has, but at the same time, that's also what makes governing really difficult. I mean, Democrats have been dealing with this Big Tent issue for a long time, where like, how do you keep all these different factions happy? Now it's the Republicans' turn to figure out, okay, how do we satisfy these new voters, these new folks that are coming into the fold, whether it's the broligarchs, as Steve Bannon put it, you know, the tech and crypto folks, you've got the youth vote, you've got more of the black vote, more of the Hispanic vote, and then the establishment part of the party. Boy, that's a whole lot to juggle, and what that looks like in practice, whether it's legislation or executive orders or just, again, the ideological contours of what this party stands for now, I think that's going to be fascinating to watch.
And if they do it right, they will be able to if they keep this coalition together, especially the younger voters, the black voters, the Latino voters, they can win election after election after election for years if they're able to keep that kind of coalition
together. But it's not
together.
easy to do.
But it's not going to be easy to do. And, you know, those fights internally are going to be fascinating.
Rachel, biggest challenge Trump faces in his first few weeks, do you think?
The House margin.
Yeah.
Period, end of story. I mean, Nancy Pelosi struggled when her margin was, what was it, like 5 or 6?
5 or 6, yeah.
And this is Nancy Pelosi, who's been in the job for a long time. She's loved, but also, frankly, feared by her members. Best whip in the Democratic Party by far. And she struggled. She eventually got it done. But Johnson, I mean, he's only been in the job for a little over a year.
He looked pretty chill, though, didn't he? I have to say. He's a calmer guy than I was expecting.
Yes. I mean, especially with 3 hours. 3
Right.
hours of sleep and 300 missed text messages.
Who can live like that, man?
I mean, if they can get stuff through the House, they're going to be fine. I mean, I think the Senate will swallow whatever the House does. But then again, Trump, on the other hand, he's got, you know, executive actions, as Dasha was just talking about. So, you know, maybe he ends up trying to do more than we even expect right now if Congress can't get things done. I mean, we've seen him push the limits on executive orders before, and he actually was rewarded for it by the Supreme Court in his first term. So, yeah, I just think Congress is going to be a real pain in his butt.
Okay, weeks of thunder, maybe months of thunder to come.
Years of thunder, probably.
Years of thunder. Well, it'll give us all something to write about, give me something to write about in Playbook. I think we're going to wrap this up. Thank you all very much for joining me on stage. Thank you all very much for coming. I'm just going to introduce our chief executive onto the stage to close things off, Goli, Sheikholeslami. Yeah, thank you all very much. Cheers.
Well, hello there. Well, thank you for the final few of you who've stuck around for me to say goodbye, and thank you for joining us this morning. I just wanted to give my thanks to all of our speakers who joined us today, and all of my colleagues, and also our sponsors, American Clean Power and the American Security Project. I also just wanted to note that in just a few days, you know, Politico is going to turn 18. We started here in Washington in 2007, and over the course of the last 18 years, we've now expanded to more than 1,100 journalists and business professionals across the United States and Europe. And I think today's program is really a perfect example of the work that we do and the unique work that we do, the excellent work that we do every single day. And it is all rooted in the fact that we assemble the most talented journalists and business professionals around and can put together a day like this morning. So thank you so much for joining us, and you can look forward to many more events like today's in the year ahead. Thanks so much.